Let me open the 5th year of the Conference on Persecution for Faith. It is a highly important conference. And this year, the undertitle is, How Can I Help? It's a great honor, a pleasure for us to guide you through this conference, and the moderators will be Monika Klementova and Daniel Raus. This is the last Wednesday before the Advent, and traditionally we commemorate an important issue in many countries of the world, which is persecution for faith. That is why this day is closely linked to the red color and is called Red Wednesday. A number of buildings in the Czech Republic and abroad will be lit in red color. This is to commemorate that religious freedom is not a fact for many people in the world. I think that there will be lots of buildings, about 100 of them, that will be lit in red. And the tradition of Red Wednesday comes from the UK. Its founder is Lord Alton, and in a while you will see and hear Lord Alton as well. There will be 2 panels within the conference. During the first panel, we'll be asking who actually needs our help. Who is the person persecuted for faith in the world? And within the second panel, we will focus on how we can help. The organizers of the activities within Red Wednesday and the organizers of this conference is the Institute for Christian Democratic Policy, the Czech Bishops' Conference, the Ecumenical Council of Churches in the Czech Republic, and the Federation of Jewish Communities in the Czech Republic. Our host is Rector of the famous Charles University, Mr. Tomáš Zima, who is holding the patronage of this event. We would like to thank him for this, and we're passing the floor to Mr. Zima. Your Excellence, Minister, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants here in the Patriots Hall or those watching us through social media, I'm very glad that on Red Wednesday we are meeting here for the 5th time already. It may be symbolic because this hall is called the Patriots Hall. Persecution for faith is unfortunately an issue for many thousands of years due to various reasons, because one individual may not like another one because of his spiritual life, because of his emotions, because of the way that he was raised, and so on. And it is very sad that at the beginning of the 21st century, these issues can be still found on almost all continents of our planet. Since Middle Ages, universities have gathered people of various minorities, nationalities, with various approaches to life. And the universities were places that always cultivated discussion about issues that should bring us together rather than separate us. But this century shows that we seem sometimes to look for the differences between us, while we should look for the thoughts of humanity, thoughts of respect, so that every one of us can be affiliated to the religion that we have chosen without oppressing the others. The question in the title of the conference, who needs help? This may be a provocative question because probably everyone needs help. Someone may need help in his faith, in his religion, and others need help because their religion is being oppressed. And who can help? Everyone can help. Based on our conscience, we may strive to contribute to a situation in which we can live happily, because we will respect the ideas of humanism and tolerance towards others. I believe that in these challenging times, we will be striving to find solutions of how to help people and how to resolve persecution for faith. We may also see various kinds of stigmatization due to the COVID pandemic. So let's be empathic towards the others and let's try to help the others as much as we can. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rector, and thank you for providing this beautiful hall of the university. And now one important thing, the patronage of Red Wednesday is provided by Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jakub Kulhánek, who is here with us. Welcome, Minister. We are very glad that you have joined us today. And Mr. Kulhánek is going to give his introductory word. Rector, ladies and gentlemen, those of you who are present or who watch us through social media, thanks a lot for inviting me to this conference. Thanks for organizing this conference, even during the COVID pandemic. All the more, I would like to express my thanks to the organizers for having this conference, which is very important. As has been said, today we commemorate Red Wednesday, not only in the Czech Republic but also abroad. This is to commemorate everyone who is persecuted for faith. It's the second time that we commemorate this day during the COVID pandemic, which has significantly impacted our lives. This is not an easy time, and it's not easy to take decisions, and that's why we have to openly discuss all these issues. And the solution is not to divide society, to find arguments against the others, and to disseminate hatred among people who have different opinions or attitudes. The periods like this one should, to the contrary, bring people together. And we should be able to cultivate discussion. The Czech Republic has supported the principles of equality and non-discrimination in its foreign policy. It means that no one's rights may be reduced, for example, for reasons of gender or affiliation to national minority or religion. As a Minister of Foreign Affairs, I'm proud of what my ministry has been doing at the level of the United Nations Council for Human Rights or within the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance. In these organizations, we speak regularly, among other things, also about persecution for faith, and we coordinate our activities with dozens of other countries of the world. And our endeavor for full freedom of religion and openness towards interreligious dialogue is taking place not only in foreign countries, but also in the Czech Republic. For example, recently, our ministry has hosted an international conference on intercultural and interreligious dialogue. Its main topic was building trust among the individual religious and cultural groups. Interreligious dialogue of religious leaders and spiritual leaders may prevent conflicts. It may lead to their solutions and to recovery of society in post-conflict or post-disaster areas. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is going to participate in Red Wednesday by lighting up the Chernin Palace in red color. This is to show full support to everyone persecuted for faith in the Word. I'm very glad, ladies and gentlemen, that the topic of supporting religious freedom is one of the integral parts of Czech foreign policy. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you lots of success during the conference.
Thank you, Minister, for coming in person to join us at our conference and for the patronage by the Minister. We know that the freedom of religion is often based on religious organizations, and they will have their say here as well. First of all, I would like to ask Mr. Stanislav Přibyl from the Czech Bishops' Conference. Dear guests, dear participants of this conference, I would like to welcome you and greet you at this conference and express my joy that we are able to organize for the first time in a row Red Wednesday, an initiative to commemorate those who have been persecuted for their faith or for their conscience. And I'm also very happy that for the third time we can join the Institute for Christian Democratic Policy and co-organize this conference. It is a great pleasure for me that it can take place in Carolinum, which is part of Charles University. Universities have always supported a cultivated exchange of opinions. I would like to thank all the co-organizers from the Ecumenical Council of Churches and the Federation of Jewish Communities for organizing not only this conference but also for being friends. This is something that I value very highly. And last week or the week before, with bishops, we took part at the Ad Limina Apostolorum visit, where we take account of the church's management. Kurt Koch, the cardinal who is responsible for the unity of Christians, went back again to Red Wednesday and mentioned it several times, that it is really great that we have this ecumenical event, something that we consider as absolutely natural. So this is the high point of the year for me, not only professionally but also personally, and I'm very happy that this event is taking place despite the pandemic, and I hope that you will receive new impulses to get more information about whom we can help and how. I wish you a fruitful conference and a nice day. Thank you. We also have among us the Secretary General of the Ecumenical Council of Churches in the Czech Republic, Mr. Petr Vinš. Dear Minister, Rector, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to join others in thanking the organizers and co-organizers of this conference and of Red Wednesday. I would like to underline that Red Wednesday is not something that is just taking place here in Prague, here in this hall. It is taking place in 110 other places around the Czech Republic. After the 4 years that we had this event in our country, it has spread, and it is not an event that would come from above, from the direction of the church organizations, but all those other parishes and communities organize them from below because they care about religious freedom all around the world. And I'm very happy that not only the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is joining in, but also our embassy in India, and spreads the idea of Red Wednesday across the world. I think that the way we commemorate Red Wednesday is important in that we do not focus on the Christians that are persecuted, but that we are really focusing on the religious freedom of everyone, irrespective of their faith, of their affiliation. And they may also be non-believers. This may be dangerous in some countries as well. And I think that we underline in this way something that we can all agree on, that a free environment, a free choice of our affiliation, of our faith, is something that we should deeply care about, all of us. And I think that Red Wednesday is a proof that this is an important question also in our country, and it is important not only for people at the top, but also for those who create civil society. And it is an idea that is shared by everyone. And this is something that I'm very happy for and that I would like to thank everyone for. Thank you. Thank you, Petr Jan Vinš. And last but not least, Mr. Tomáš Kraus, who represents the Federation of Jewish Communities in the Czech Republic. Minister, Rector, Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I would like to join everyone and thank others, like my colleagues and my friends said. I think you can all see that we are here people who have decided to implement some projects together, and we are really friends. And I think we all know that nothing happens by chance. And this conference and Red Wednesday is taking place on the 24th of November. And 80 years ago, on that same day, at 6 o'clock in the morning, on Hybernska or Masaryk's train station, we had 40 young men who met together, and they thought they were going to work somewhere as the protectorate required them to do. And these were 342 people, and one of them was my father. They went by train to Bohušovice, and then they had to walk 2.5 kilometers to the town of Terezín, and they never left Terezín, or most of them. And for 4 years they stayed there, and if they left Terezín, they went to even worse concentration camps than Terezín was. And I think we don't have to remind ourselves of the tragedy and the extent of the tragedy of the Holocaust. So that was on the 24th of November. And we had more and more transports where people walked to the Bubny train station in Prague and traveled to concentration camps. And nobody spoke up. People knew that something strange was happening, but they kept silent. And this should be our motivation, even though this is not that is touching us directly, for example, anti-Semitism or some violation of our religious freedoms. But this is happening in other parts of the world. And who is going to speak up for them? They are in the same or similar situation as my father was, or other of our friends. So I think it's important to speak up, and Red Wednesday is certainly an important occasion when we can do this and send out this message, not only around the Czech Republic and Europe, but all across the world. Thank you. Thank you for this personal story, and I think it is quite symbolic, because the question of persecution for faith is full of strong stories, and I think they speak better than any statistics would. So thank you very much for this introductory part of our conference, because now we can open our first panel, and as I said, it asks the question, who needs help today? What is the situation around the world, and who are the carriers of these strong stories, and who are the people who are risking their careers, families, and often their lives for faith? In the first panel, you will hear 4 speakers. The first one is Mrs. Marcella Schemanski, who is a representative of Aid to the Church in Need. Then we will have a virtual connection with Lord Alton, hopefully, who is the instigator and spiritual father of Red Wednesday. Then Rabbi Andrew Baker, who is present here among us, from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, who is the special envoy for anti-Semitism. And last but not least, Pavel Svoboda, who is the main instigator of Red Wednesday here in the Czech Republic. So we have introduced the participants of the first panel, but I would like to remind you that we will have a Q&A after the panel, not after each contribution, but one big Q&A at the end. So please don't forget your questions if you have any. And for those who are online, you can send us a question during the duration of the presentations, and we will get back to them. So you can post your questions in the Facebook chat, and remember all your questions. And now, Monica, could you please present the first speaker? Marcella Schemanski is somebody who probably doesn't need any introduction for the regular participants of our conference. I think you were here with us every year, either in person or online, and since 2011, Marcella has been the EU and UN advocacy officer at the Pontifical Foundation Aid to the Church in Need, and previously she worked as a media correspondent and PR expert with an emphasis on persecuted church promotion. She is also the editor of ACN's biennial Religious Freedom in the World report that is edited or published by ACN and covers 196 countries. The floor is yours, Marcella.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for being here. In the name of the persecuted for their faith, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you briefly the findings of the report Religious Freedom in the World 2021, which was published on the 20th of April. This report, of which I have the honor of being the editor-in-chief for already 3 editions, is published every 2 years by the Pontifical Foundation Aid to the Church in Need, and aims at offering a complementary view to those reports published in the United States and other organizations. What happens is that this is the only report on the global status of religious freedom that is not published in the United States and that is not published for or by a government. We are glad to contribute to a global effort to highlight the importance to protect and promote the right, as it is called in the UN Declaration for Human Rights. It is called the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And it is subscribed by hundreds of countries in the international human rights treaties. So it is not only a declaration of beautiful intentions regarding the human dignity, but the signatories of this declaration have also translated this into local laws and into international covenants for civil and political rights. So all of us in this room enjoy them thanks to those engagements from our governments to promote and protect the freedom of religion and other 26 rights that are enshrined in the UN Declaration for Human Rights. So, Article 18 of the Universal Declaration states the different aspects of this right, and this is something really very important for us to keep in mind, okay, because we just hear freedom of religion, and we think that it's entering a church or a synagogue or another temple. But it is a fundamental right that has 4 dimensions, and the violation of any of those dimensions means a violation of our individual right. Okay? First dimension, to have or not to have a religion is part of this right. Second, the right to change of that religion is also part of that Article 18. Third, the freedom to live according to your principles, in public or in private, is part of that right. And the freedom to live according to those principles, individually and collectively, is also part of that right. I have to emphasize this because very often we are only conscious of the one or the other thing. We only know about having a religion or about being able to live according to your principles. But we forget the dimensions of public and private, individual and collective. And all fundamental rights, when they start being attacked, they start being attacked by one of those 4 dimensions. Particularly, and this in the West, the dimensions of living according to your principles in public or in private, and individually and collectively. So this report is published in 6 languages, and it is available on the internet to all. We cover to the best of our capacity the situation of the fundamental right in 196 countries, one by one. And we look at all the religions present that make more than 1% of the population. This report is about a right subscribed by many countries and that have, where the governments, I repeat, have engaged to translate these principles into regular common law. So it is up to us as citizens to keep an eye on the fulfillment of these obligations of our own governments. So we consider it a religious freedom under threat, a right under threat. Why? Because last time that I was the editor, the report came out at 850 pages. And now it turns out that it has 1,200 pages. So things went very, very bad. What happened? We discovered, according to the methodology and definitions that we devised, which are available for discussion and for presentation whenever you feel the curiosity for that, we discovered that in 62 countries there are violations of religious freedom out of 196. Okay? One of those 4 dimensions is not being respected. Then we have in our methodology stages of the degree of the violation of the fundamental right. We are not going to just talk about persecution. No, that is one stage of the violations. So we have first stage, intolerance that goes unsurveyed. That is not marked there, but it's intolerance. Then second, discrimination. Third, persecution. And fourth, genocide. Okay? In this map, in this figure, you can see 36 countries suffer from the discrimination. That means when it's quite normal to treat a religious group with particular laws. But there are regulations that only apply to a particular group and where the faithful already start suffering treatment of the type of, if you are of a particular religion, you cannot access public office. For example, in Pakistan and many other countries, in Egypt. In Egypt, nobody who is not Muslim can belong in the Olympic teams. Okay? So there are several little things that just one lets pass. You just let it pass. And then you become a second-class citizen. And then you put yourself in danger of persecution. And there you are, 26 countries of the world, 13% of all the countries of the world have suffered from persecution. That makes that in every 3 countries in the world, there are violations of religious freedom. So, 67% of the population, That looks impressive. Those are 100 little men. And 67 are colored in red. So there we can see the proportion of how many are not able to live fully those 4 dimensions of the religious freedom that I mentioned to you. And in many of these countries, the religious minorities are the most targeted. However, not always. And one case in point that we have now, as we speak, is the case of Nigeria, where the Christians make half of the population of 200 million, and they are being attacked constantly, murdered, chased away from their property, etc. So they are making, everything is being done so that they become a minority, although they are not one. So this is the map of religious freedom. I need you to pay attention to that one and try to remember. It will be familiar to you because it looks very much like any map of violations of human rights. Any map of abuse, any map of impunity or injustice, authoritarian governments, etc. And every year we are a bit desperate to realize that the map looks very much like the previous time. So, but I want you to see here, this is the map of persecution, this is the map of discrimination, of genocide also. It is the map of poverty and pain. But it is also, and that's why it repeats, is the map of impunity. These are the countries that year after year get away with whatever they are doing to their own citizens. And this is the map also of the people who have the strongest faith in the world, who will not deny their God, even having a barrel of a gun in front of their eyes. So please keep that in mind. So all those horrible figures we count here, and they are 5.2 billion people, so it's really a large amount of the population of the world. Because we say only the number of countries, it doesn't sound too impressive, but when you realize that most of the people in the world live there, then it's really to wonder, and just not to think, look at the shadow of the very small Europe there at the top, compared to the map of repression and pain that is colored in orange and red. And then you know that you cannot ignore it. We do not have that luxury. We distinguish 3 main types of authors of violations: authoritarian governments, Islamist extremists, and ethnic religious nationalists. We also have to come up with these definitions in order to distinguish and not just say again, oh, China and North Korea are the worst. No, it's authoritarian governments, including China and North Korea. It's Islamist extremists, and not only think of Arab countries in Middle East or Africa, but also all along the countries in between the 2 tropics, Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, from Senegal to the Philippines. The Islamic State is establishing its rule with the same cruel methods that they used in Iraq and Syria, imposing their most extremist view of Islam, even on the many millions of moderate Islamic population who lives in those 26 countries. And look at the numbers. It's 1.2 billion people who are being, in one way or the other, exposed to Islamist extremists. And then we have what we called the ethnic religious nationalists, because this is a trend very present in Asia that few people think of, because you cannot imagine that Buddhist monks are persecuting Muslims or Christians. But however, this is happening. This is happening in Myanmar, and this is happening in Sri Lanka, and this is happening in many other countries around Southeast Asia. In India, the Hindu nationalists believe that ethnicity and the religion makes them superior to the others. So there is a supremacism that is based on ethnic and religious profiles. And here you have only 4 countries with 1.6 billion inhabitants. However, some of these countries also include more than one group. For example, in Pakistan, you have an authoritarian government where there are Islamic extremists, and they also have ethno-religious nationalism. So difficult to escape. And that's how we get to this map in which most of the population of the world suffers from persecution. I was telling you about Africa. The Islamic state people left Iraq and Syria, were chased by the coalition, and they crossed the border with Turkey, and from Turkey they took planes to Libya, and from Libya they crossed Algeria and arrived to all those countries over there. The persecution is extreme in 42% of those countries in Africa. In Mali, Burkina Faso, where I will be next week, Niger, Nigeria, and Chad, the situation is expanding with the Islamic State for West Africa. And at the same time, from the Indian Ocean, from Ethiopia, Tanzania, and others, they are advancing in the other direction. For some reason, they cannot go over Central African Republic, which is a country that is very important for the Czech Republic, in the sense that it was Czech missionaries who established there the Carmelite missions, and they are the ones who are from here, from Prague, the father Anastasio, are founding more missions, and they have been able to hold the fort thanks to Providence, because when you see this map, you don't understand how. Burkina Faso, where I'm going next week, is 60% of the territory is inaccessible because of jihadists and local violent groups since the end of 2020. The church and other religious groups are holding the fort again, and I'm going to see and talk to them what is it that they need, or how is it that they are going to get organized, because of course they refuse to leave being the biggest providers of social services in that region. In Mozambique, the Islamic State arrived like about 1.5 years ago to the north. They're at the border with Tanzania, and that's where they are really making a big destruction. Portugal and the European Union are funding some military help, but Hungary is the country that jumped first to their aid. Together with Portugal, they gathered money for the humanitarian aid for the internally displaced people. But this is a continuous need that cannot be shouldered only by the Caritas locally and only by Hungary and Portugal. So they are always looking for partners to continue supporting the church in those places. Well, those little flags of the Islamic State really are not just imaginary. We have reports, first-hand reports of people who have seen the Islamic flag there in all those countries. As you can see, it goes all the way to Malaysia and to the Philippines. So they are well on their way of reestablishing the caliphate that they could not establish in Iraq and Syria. And this area, with the countries that I mentioned where there are billions of people, with the ethno-religious nationalism, you see India, Nepal, Pakistan, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Bhutan. That's where the Buddhists are doing the persecution. So in many of the religions, there's a penalty, sometimes even death, for changing your religion. So that's why we really maintain the fact that this is an individual fundamental right, individual and not communal, because like that, people can actually maintain their right to change of religion. China, it's an authoritarian government, everybody knows it, it's a power, they make viruses and they make weapons, and we are able to do all sorts of, we cannot live without them in a sort of way. However, they have their technology, which is for sale and has been bought already by several Latin American governments, to survey and follow their citizens. And this is the biggest danger, because we all think that our right to freedom of thought and conscience and religion is internal, that we can keep it no matter what pressure we have. However, because they invented this surveillance system with cameras through your mobile phone and using a social credit card, as they call it, every time that you go into a church or a temple, you have points of your social credit card taken away. And if you you speak to your children at home of religion, they can turn on your phone and actually hear what you are talking about. So, and they take points out of your social credit card, which translates in having or not access to economic advantage. And here I need to underline something for us who get very scared about China. there are 1.4 billion Chinese citizens. More than half self-describe as believers. 1.4 billion, so you are talking about 700 million Chinese who says, I am a believer in some form of spirituality. How do you deal with 800 million Chinese citizens who are also poor to abandon their religion? And how poor are they? In spite of looking mighty, the GDP per capita in China is 5 times smaller than the one in the United States. It's the same one as in Mexico, my country. So it's not spectacular. They are poor people, and they are 1.4 billion poor people. So this, the economic inequality index of China and the US, however, is very similar. It's almost the same, which means that there are the mega rich and the ultra poor. And there's this gap that can be exploited by the political powers who want to eliminate spiritual or just pluralism of thought. So this, when you have this poverty, these numbers, and the mega rich and the ultra poor, that gives a population ready to make sacrifices for any economic improvement that you can offer. That is why China can be manipulated into that. So we have to remain vigilant. It's not a waste of time to speak about poverty and religious freedom. Okay?
Sorry, we are running out of time. So.
Running out of time. Thank you. And I want just to say that in Europe, I mean, we are really persecuted more by something that Pope Francis has called polite persecution, which is religious persecution disguised as progress. It's a misunderstood secularism in which we believe that being secular means eliminating every religious aspect from public life, when actually being a secular government means simply separating state from religion and maintaining the public space open for those who have a faith and for those who do not. That is what the government, a secular government, engages to do. If they start discriminating against the faithful in order to give more rights to those who do not have any faith, they are actually already violating your religious freedom. So I wanted to finish on this note on the polite persecution because it's gaining a lot of ground in Europe and in the OSCE countries. So we need to remain vigilant on this. So, and these things that we have seen, the map, please remember it. We cannot afford to have the same map within 2 years when I come up with my next report. So I am here also because I find here people with whom we can have a dialogue and we can devise strategies and ways to avoid that level of impunity and pain continues. Thank you very much.
Tak, děkujeme.
Thank you. And I hope that next year Marcella Schemanski will come with a better map, or at least a slightly better map. And our next speaker, Lord Alton, is the instigator of Red Wednesday. And we are very happy that it looks like the connection is working. And for 18 years, he was the member of the House of Commons of the Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland for Liverpool constituency, but not in the Beatles era, unfortunately. He's also an independent crossbench member of the House of Lords, and he has particularly campaigned in human rights, rights of minorities, religious freedom, and the right to life. And he also helped dissenters in the communist bloc. He is the patron or trustee of several charities and voluntary organizations. In 2016, he instigated Red Wednesday, a day of action to draw attention to those who are persecuted for their religion or belief. And we are very happy that we can see Mr. Alton here on our screens.
I'm happy to see you and very pleased to be with you for your conference in Prague, but especially following Marcella, because we've become great friends over the years and she does brilliant work in documenting the scale of these terrible atrocities and persecution that happens worldwide. one thing we will be doing in solidarity with you and many others around the world to commemorate Red Wednesday today, here at Westminster tonight, Mr. Speaker has given permission for the whole of the Houses of Parliament to be lit up red, as will the British Foreign Office, as a sign of our solidarity with those who are suffering for freedom of religion or belief. My own interest in all of this began when I was a young MP, member of the House of Commons, and I travelled in the former Soviet Union and in Eastern and Central Europe, and I met people who were incredibly inspiring. Amongst those I met was Bishop Pavlo Vasilik and Ivan Gel, who was chairman of the Committee for the Defence of the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine, who had spent 17 and 18 years in Soviet prisons because of their faith. And I campaigned for people like the Siberian Seven, for Valery Baranov, the Alexander Ogorodnikov, Father Calciu in Romania, who suffered as well at the hands of the Ceausescu regime. The common thing that they had for me was that they inspired me and people who heard their stories to take our own beliefs more seriously and to use the privileges and freedoms and the liberties that we enjoy, to use our voices on their behalf. So today, Red Wednesday, is the day when we think about the millions around the world who are persecuted because of their religion or belief. And I would invite everyone who is here to reflect on what Marcella was just saying to us about China and spare a thought for the Uyghur Muslims who are incarcerated in China, for the ancient Christian churches and the Yazidis still facing genocide in the Middle East, and for non-believers persecuted for their atheism, and the 250 million Christians who are persecuted worldwide. The lodestar or navigation point for my remarks today is Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was promulgated in 1948, about the same time as the Genocide Convention. And both documents and both promulgations were in response to the defining horrors of the Holocaust. Article 18 states this. It says, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. This right includes freedom to change their religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest their religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. The Declaration's stated objective was, and I quote, to realize a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations. Eleanor Roosevelt, the formidable chair of the drafting committee, argued that freedom of religion was one of the four essential freedoms of mankind. In her words, religious freedom cannot just mean Protestant freedom. It must be freedom of all religious people. And she rejoiced in having friends from all faiths and all races. Article 18 emerged from the infamies of the 20th century, from the Armenian genocide to the defining depredations of Stalin's gulags and Hitler's concentration camps, from the pestilential nature of persecution, demonization, scapegoating, and hateful prejudice. And notwithstanding violence associated with religion sometimes, it emerged from ideology, nation, and race. It was the bloodiest century in human history, with the loss of 100 million lives. The four great murderers of the 20th century, Mao, Stalin, Hitler, and Pol Pot, were united by their hatred of religious faith. Yet how quickly we forget, which is why several years ago, as you've heard, I suggested we create a day to mark atrocities committed against those who refuse to renounce their faith or their beliefs and who suffer as a consequence of Article 18 violations or through atrocity crimes. So often ignored discrimination and hatred of difference can so easily morph into persecution and then into crimes against humanity and then onto genocide itself. Article 18 then is like a canary in the mine, warning of poisonous danger ahead. To illustrate that this is contemporary and real, I want to examine examples of what happens when we continue to take Article 18 and our duties that go with it sufficiently seriously. It all began when we ignored the persecution of the Armenians and the genocide which followed. I would recommend to those who haven't maybe come across it or read it, Franz Werfel's novel, The 40 Days of Mozambique, which was published in 1933, and it was based on a true story about the Armenian genocide. His books were burnt by the Nazis, no doubt to try to erase humanity's memory, Hitler having famously asked, "Who now remembers the Armenians?" The Armenian deportations and genocide claimed the lives of an estimated 1.5 million Armenian Christians. Werfel, in his novel, tells the story of several thousand Christians who took refuge on the mountain of Mozambique. The intervention of the French Navy led to their dramatic rescue. Now, move from the fiction to fact. In 2019, I visited northern Iraq and saw for myself the continuation of a genocide which set out to eradicate the region's Christians and other minorities. I met Yazidis who had been besieged on a real-life mountain, Mount Sinjar. Many were murdered or enslaved. What happened to them and to the Christians of Syria and Iraq illustrates how that slow burn genocide initiated by the Ottoman Turks, and which has its genesis in persecution and discrimination and the violation of Article 18, continues in places like northern Iraq to this very day. In 1914, Christians made up a quarter of that region's population. Now they are less than 5%. During a meeting which I chaired here in the British Parliament, which was addressed by Archbishop Bashavada of Erbil, he underlined the traumatic, degrading and inhuman treatment that his own community had suffered, pleading with the international community to provide protection. Our obligations are set out in the preamble to the sixth recital of the 1998 Rome Statute, which established the International Criminal Court, and which recalls that, I quote, "It is the duty of every state to exercise its criminal jurisdiction over those responsible for international crimes." The Genocide Convention itself, in 1948, states that obligations exist on all the signatory states to prevent, to punish the crime of genocide, and that it's not territorially limited by the convention. Genocide is defined in Article 2 of the 1948 Convention as follows. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. The convention, and even the word genocide, came from the campaigning of the Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin, more than 40 of whose family were slaughtered in the genocide of European Jews, and who said that international cooperation was needed to liberate mankind from such an odious scourge. When countries added their signatures to the convention, it laid upon them the moral and legal duty to undertake, to prevent, and to punish genocide, surely the crime above all crimes. Yet all the minorities in the Middle East, whose very existence is under direct and immediate threat, have received from Western governments, all they've received are woolly undertakings that they will collect evidence of what occurred. The former Yazidi MP told me she couldn't understand why we in the West had not declared these events a genocide and why we had remained so silent. In a leading article, the Times newspaper said the destruction of Christians from the Middle East now amounts to nothing less than genocide. That crime, most hideously demonstrated by the Nazis, now enjoins others to take active steps to protect the victims. And writing in another of our national newspapers, the Daily Telegraph, Boris Johnson, who was then the Foreign Secretary, said ISIS are engaged in what can only be called genocide, though, he said, for some baffling reason, the Foreign Office still hesitates to use the term genocide. In reality, since 1948, we have witnessed genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Burma, Bosnia, Darfur and northern Iraq, and now in Tigray and in China's Xinjiang. And this isn't an exhaustive list, yet still governments like my own refuse to name things for what they are. The reason isn't baffling, it's because they want to avoid the obligations which flow from such a legal recognition. I've been to Western China and Tibet and have regularly raised the Chinese Communist Party's atrocities. These include its now discredited one-child policy, the only country in the world where it was illegal to have a brother or a sister, based on forced sterilizations and forced abortions, the destruction of churches, the imprisonment of pastors such as Wang Yi, incarcerated bishops, lawyers, dissenters, journalists, such as the young Christian woman journalist lawyer, Zhang Zhan, who has been tortured and jailed for 4 years for shining a light into the origins of the COVID pandemic in Wuhan. On Friday last, concerned for her deteriorating health, the United Nations called for her release. And I would appeal to everyone on this call and those of you in Prague who are organizing this event to ensure that the Chinese ambassadors in the jurisdictions where you live are receiving representations about Zhang Zhan and calling for her release. An independent tribunal held here in the United Kingdom and chaired by an illustrious human rights lawyer, Sir Geoffrey Nice, Queen's Counsel, found, his words, incontrovertible evidence of forced organ harvesting of Falun Gong practitioners and other minorities. Since the enormities of the Cultural Revolution and the deaths of some 50 million Chinese people and the massacre in Tiananmen Square, we've seen outrages in Tibet and Hong Kong, and now on a daily basis, the intimidation of Taiwan. And I salute particularly the courage of countries like Lithuania, who have stood alongside Taiwan and refused to be bullied by the CCP. As for the Uyghurs, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says, his words, the forcing of men, women and children into concentration camps, trying to in effect re-educate them to be adherents to the ideology of the Chinese Communist Party, all of that, he said, speaks to an effort to commit genocide. Liz Truss, our new United Kingdom Foreign Secretary, has said that what is happening in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs is undoubtedly a genocide. The British House of Commons has said the same. So now we have the unprecedented situation where the British Foreign Secretary is saying one thing and the British Foreign Office is saying the opposite. So there we have it. While people suffer grievously, civilized democratic countries refuse to act. They refuse to uphold both Article 18 and the Genocide Convention. And on this Red Wednesday, I hope that all of us who are on this call will insist that this changes and that we take our duties seriously, and remembering always the consequences which flow from remaining silent. I'll end with the words of a hero of mine, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Protestant theologian who was murdered by the Nazis. He said that not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. Thank you for listening.
Tak děkujeme Lordu Altonovi.
Thank you, Lord Alton, for this nice speech and this important message, and for instigating and initiating this tradition of Red Wednesday, which continues despite COVID. And now the next speaker. Let me introduce the next speaker, which is Rabbi Andrew Baker, Special Envoy for Anti-Semitism from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He's also a director of the American Jewish Committee, of the Committee of International Jewish Affairs, and he's also the officer of the Jewish Claims Conference. And he has also served on the restitution and historical commissions, not only in the Czech Republic, but also in Lithuania, Romania, and Slovakia. We could also mention that he is the former president of the Washington Board of Rabbis, as well as the former chaplain at St. Quentin Prison. We are very glad that Rabbi Andrew Baker could come from Washington to Prague, even in these challenging times, and I'm very glad to pass him the floor.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be speaking to a group in person these days, something we no longer take for granted. It was virtually 20 years ago when we saw incidents of anti-Semitism occurring, really a resurgence of anti-Semitism in various parts of Europe that literally caught everyone by surprise. Governments were slow to even recognize this as anti-Semitism, let alone to figure out what to do with it. in the end, we saw a real disconnect between Jewish communities that were feeling literally threatened and governments that were blind to what was taking place. Some of what we saw at the time came to be known as a new form of anti-Semitism. Now, 20 years on, this new anti-Semitism is no longer new. But the problem of anti-Semitism is very much with us. In fact, a recent survey conducted in the United States, released only last month, found that among American Jews, 90% believe anti-Semitism is a serious problem. And that kind of a number is no less here in Europe. We found that some 40% of American Jews had experienced firsthand anti-Semitism or an anti-Semitic act. About a third of Jews in America and a similar percentage in Europe literally, when they go out on the street, take precautions. They may not want to be identified physically by what they wear as being Jewish. They may literally avoid going to places because of the fear of an anti-Semitic attack. This is the critical challenge we face. And what I want to do in the time I have allotted is first to try to explain the different forms of anti-Semitism that we're experiencing, and then to at least speak a bit about what some efforts are now being undertaken to address those problems, efforts by organizations like the OSCE, like the European Union, and national governments as well. There's a traditional form of anti-Semitism that has long been with us. We sometimes will speak of it as anti-Semitism coming from the extreme right, manifest in groups like neo-Nazis and skinheads, manifest in right-wing extremist political parties, an anti-Semitism that plays on all the traditional conspiracy theories about Jews. By the way, in many cases, this has simply been updated now during the COVID pandemic. Jews once responsible for the Black Plague in Middle Ages can now be pointed to as being responsible for the COVID pandemic. In any case, we have seen this anti-Semitism on the right continue, even gaining new numbers in light of general population dissatisfaction with the political process and so on. We see as well a second form of anti-Semitism, an anti-Semitism coming from the left. It is an anti-Semitism that is quite frequently connected to animus toward the state of Israel. The state of Israel itself is demonized. Its very existence is called into question. And Jews, wherever they live, are identified with the state of Israel. Maybe literally targets by people who would otherwise, if they could, target Israel itself. Sometimes this anti-Israel form is only a mask for traditional anti-Semitism, a kind of anti-Zionism that uses Zionism and Zionist as a substitute. We saw that in literal full force several years ago in the UK, surrounding Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party leader, which led literally to the government itself investigating the Labour Party for anti-Semitism. Third, we recognize that there are anti-Semitic incidents and attacks coming disproportionately from parts of the Muslim communities. Certainly a decade ago, Jewish communities were experiencing literal physical attacks and threats from Islamist extremists, an issue that I think was well known and that resulted in very real tragedies across the European continent. That is one aspect of this, but the reality is that based on attitude surveys, Muslims in Europe tend to have higher negative views of Jews than the general population. Perhaps not a surprise. The countries from where many of them emigrated have an anti-Judaism built into those societies. It may not result in physical attacks, although it sometimes has, but certainly it has contributed to harassment and other anti-Semitic experiences that has really eroded many Jewish communities' very sense of security and safety in their own countries, in their own cities. Fourth, we have seen a Holocaust distortion that has become more prevalent in Central and Eastern Europe. No longer might we face that absolute notion of those who would deny the very reality of the Holocaust, something that the EU member states recognize as a matter to be declared illegal, but rather countries where the Holocaust took place, we have seen governments, we've seen political movements want to sort of sanitize that Holocaust history, want to eliminate or lessen the role of the actual local collaborators in the persecution and murder of Jews. We saw this as a significant challenge literally 30 years ago as these countries came out from under communism. And at the time, we might have ascribed this to simply ignorance. There was not a critical, careful examination possible during all the decades of communism. But when we're seeing it today, we have to recognize it's for a different reason. It's no longer out of ignorance. The history of the Holocaust is pretty well known in these countries, and there are critical historians in all of these places. Rather, now it's being instrumentalized. It's being used to support some of these right-wing populist parties. Fascist-era figures are being honored, plaques erected in their name. It not only distorts history, but it also undermines the very sense of place for Jews in these countries who themselves were survivors of the Holocaust or children of those survivors. I want to speak of a fifth problem Jews in parts of Europe today face. You might not think of it immediately as a direct form of anti-Semitism, but I would say we can see something that one might speak of as anti-Semitism in effect, even if it is not anti-Semitism by intent. Here we see a real challenge to long-standing religious practices for Jews, but I would add also for Muslims in a number of European states. There are efforts to ban the centuries-old practice of circumcision. For Jews, we speak of this as Brit Milah. It's conducted for every newborn male on the 8th day after birth. It is a practice that originates in the biblical account itself of Abraham circumcising Isaac. It is something that wherever Jews have lived, they've never really confronted any effort to try and restrict this practice, except, of course, during the Nazi era. The movement today that's pushing for this is a movement that argues on the basis of children's rights. It should be prohibited or deferred until these children become adults. And it is something that, while it has not gained passage yet in any country, it has been debated and legislation has actually been presented in several countries. We see with more success efforts to ban the traditional practice of religious slaughter, essentially kosher slaughter. The argument here is that in order to protect the rights of animals, lessen their pain, certain procedure, the stunning of those animals has to take place before slaughter. In doing so, it would render any kind of slaughter at least unkosher under Jewish law and tradition. It also challenges Muslim practice of halal slaughter. And here we've seen multiple countries adopt such legislation. Some countries have had it of long standing when, for example, in Switzerland or in Norway, it was not out of a concern for animal rights. It was literally a way in Switzerland to try to keep Jews out of the country, or in other places in Norway, referencing to the Nazi period. But today, we have seen laws passed and upheld by the European Court in Belgium. We've seen it banned in a number of Scandinavian countries. One argument, you can import kosher meat, will fall along the wayside when more and more countries are literally banning the practice. Again, it may not be out of an anti-Semitic intent in promoting this legislation, but there's no secret when you see the political coalition supporting it, it may be progressive parties on one piece, but then it's the right-wing traditional nativist parties alongside them, not noted for animal protection issues, but they see in it an anti-Muslim frame, an anti-Semitic frame, and again, it is gaining more and more support. And I think we need to recognize it represents literally an existential threat to the future of Jewish life in these countries if these longstanding practices are to be forbidden. So that, I would say, are the different aspects of the problem we're facing today. In the few minutes I have left, let me just outline some of the efforts undertaken to try and address and deal with these problems. It's notable that the OSCE organized a first conference on anti-Semitism already in 2003. It led to materials, commitments by governments, one aspect critically focused on preserving, protecting the security of Jewish institutions, pushing governments to step forward, education to combat anti-Semitism, Holocaust education as a piece of it. It was only 6 years ago that the EU finally organized, after a significant pressure by Jewish communities, a first conference on the problem, but it has moved quite dramatically since then in pushing governments, one area, adopt a working definition of anti-Semitism that is complete and comprehensive, and calling on member states to develop individual action plans to deal with the problem of anti-Semitism. These are all very important steps taken by governments, but I think and finally here I would say, we recognize that the challenge of fighting anti-Semitism is one that is before all of us. It has been said, so I will repeat something you may already have heard. Anti-Semitism not only threatens Jews, it really threatens society at large. And in this case, we need to really work collectively together. Probably one of the most important elements in the fight against anti-Semitism is interreligious cooperation and solidarity. I think there you have an understanding of the challenges we face. We have moral voices that can join together. The fact is we may never eliminate anti-Semitism, but there's much we can do to lessen the problem, to make life again secure for Jewish communities and Jewish populations. The true measure, I would say in closing, is not necessarily the number of anti-Semites in a society. Tragically, I think they will always be there. The real measure, however, is the number of anti-Semites, the number of people willing to participate, speak out, and join in the fight against it. So thank you again for giving me this opportunity to speak with you this afternoon.
Tak děkujeme, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi Andrew Baker. Don't forget your questions, because after the next speaker we will have time for a Q&A. And I would like to introduce the last speaker, Pavel Svoboda. Pavel Svoboda is the spiritual father of Red Wednesday here in the Czech Republic, and it was him who pushed through this initiative in our country. Pavel Svoboda is Associate Professor of EU Law and Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Institute for Christian Democratic Policy. He has previously served as Minister, President of the Legislative Council of the Government of the Czech Republic and as ambassador. And from 2014 to 2019, he was a member of the European Parliament and chairman of its Committee on Legal Affairs. Last year, it was Pavel Svoboda who, and this hall, called for a specific topic for this year's conference. Whom and how can we help? So I'm very happy that this is taking place now, and I give the floor to Pavel. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, before starting, I have to say that together with Monika Klementová, we were trying to implement this idea of Red Wednesday in our country, so I shouldn't be the only one who is celebrated for this. We were many. But I would like to thank all of you who are either present here in this hall and to the viewers of TV Norway for their attention, and to the TV as well for their attention to the persecution for faith. And it is a really great honor for me to be able to sit here on this panel with honorable panelists. I would like to first of all mention very brief 3 propositions concerning religious freedom, and then to suggest ways of using new EU legislation to help those who are persecuted. EU law is one of my topics, so this is what I'm going to speak about in the second part of my presentation. The first proposition: it would really be a success if we were able to get rid of the violent layer of persecution, which is the killing, the torturing, and the rapes. So legally it would be a success if we got rid at least of the violation of the right to life and right to bodily integrity. These are one of the basic human rights that need to be respected no matter what, especially irrespective of whether other basic human rights are being violated as well, which is, for example, the freedom of religion. But I think we are very far from such a success. My second proposition: I have the feeling that the presence of the religious element in all those atrocities committed on believers is something that causes indifference also in the Western societies toward the persecution for faith. Our Western civilization that prides itself on its focus on human rights is somehow indifferent to this huge genocide. And it seems to me that faith, in their eyes, is some sort of an abstract freedom which is only good for some academic debates among intellectuals. And it is quite ununderstandable that the media share this indifference, because they love bloody stories, and persecution for faith is unfortunately one such story. But the media cover this topic in a negligible manner as compared to other problems, other tragedies. On the internet and on TV, we see so much violence that even the statistics of killings for religion and the worsening statistics that we hear about from Marcella Schemanski at this conference and from other panelists is something that leave the average viewer indifferent. So the question is, how should we raise the attention of the media, because we cannot go much further without the media. I'm afraid that we have to look for inspiration at Stalin. He said that the death of an individual is a tragedy and the death of millions is statistics. So I think that we should realize that now we are living at the times of entertainment, and we shouldn't be speaking about statistics, but we should be telling individual stories of people through series, through films. I think a good film about Asia Bibi's story could be such an example. My third proposition: this indifference of the media and of the majority Western society shows us that we are not aware of the whole scope of the religious freedom, because this also includes the right to change your affiliation or to have none. And this is something that is important for every individual. And now I would like to suggest 3 possibilities how to use the new legislation of the European Union to help those who are persecuted. Like Lord Alton, I will use some legalese here. So first of all, this year, the Regulation 2021/947 establishing the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument, Global Europe, was adopted. And since it is called an instrument, it means a financial fund in the EU speak. And this regulation includes the Annex 2, which speaks about the funding of projects that should support freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief, including by means of measures to eliminate all forms of hatred, intolerance, and discrimination based on religion or belief, and by fostering tolerance and respect for religious and cultural diversity within and among societies. This regulation also includes the Annex number 3, which speaks about the funding of projects with the aim to, and I will quote again, to promote freedom of expression, assembly and association, freedom of thought, conscience and religion or belief. How should we use this regulation? We have to find Christian organizations or other organizations that would not only apply for these funds, but actually use them to benefit those who are persecuted. Unfortunately, we can see that there are various pseudo-religious organizations who have made a business of fighting for the persecuted, but they are the only ones benefiting from it. Last year, the Regulation 2020/1998 concerning restrictive measures against serious human rights violations and abuses was adopted. And pursuant to this regulation, the EU can fine or provide measures against violations or abuses of freedom or religion or belief. And the sanctions can be, for example, the prohibition of the entry to the territory of the EU to groups or individuals who are responsible for persecution for their belief, or even freezing their assets. Pursuant to Article 5, the Council, upon the proposal of the Member State or the High Representative, sets out a list of such entities that are provided in the Annex. The Council of the EU, these are ministers of the Member States, including the Minister for Foreign Affairs that we had the honor of having among us. So our government could alone or in collaboration with other governments come up with specific names and proposals to put persons on this list. So it is our task to motivate the government to do so. And I think that the atmosphere is much more positive after the elections nowadays. If you look at the North Korean regime, it gains funds, for example, by sending North Koreans abroad to work as slaves, basically. We've seen such cases even in Poland. And the North Korean regime would not be able to work without the support of China. And I have no doubt that the secret services have information about who in the Chinese structures is responsible for the persecution for faith and for supporting North Korea. And these people should be on those lists of the European Union. Also, we have a number of agreements with countries who violate human rights, including the right to the religious freedom, and they are supporting them. And these conventions have the condition of observing human rights. An example of such countries is Pakistan, that Marcella Schemanski mentioned. So what should we do? We should call upon the ministers of foreign affairs to use this instrument actively so that it doesn't stay on paper. And just a brief comment on what Rabbi Andrew Baker said. Even though I've been involved in European law for 30 years, only recently did I find the article number 13, which says specifically that ritual slaughters are specifically authorized. So it is something that is included in the EU law. Because you mentioned the attempts in Scandinavia to ban these slaughters of animals, ritual slaughters. So these countries would actually go against the EU conventions, and it would be a reason for other member states to send them to the European Court of Justice for such a violation. And that's all from me. Thank you for your attention.
And now we have space for your questions. So if you do have any question, you can raise your hand, and you need to come to the microphone so that everyone can hear you. And could you please introduce yourself? Hello, my name is Zdeněk Skalka. I'm the pastoral assistant in Ostrava Kunčičky. And I'm also a member of the Christian Democratic Union. I have a question to Mrs. Szymanski. You have shown us the map about the atrocities and persecution. How is it possible that the situation remains the same, or that it's deteriorating? Who needs help, or how I can help? These are the titles of this conference. And my question is, why China and Russia are members of the United Nations? Why do we have these states there? What does UN do? Because for me, as Zdeněk Skalka, the United Nations don't do anything. And just one thought, the Uyghurs, they are Muslims. So how is it possible that China is buying plots in Afghanistan and that China cooperates with others? How is this possible? Why don't Muslims respond to this? And another question to Mr. Baker. You have mentioned anti-Semitism. And I can also see some signs of anti-Semitism in our region. When I support the Jewish community, I get many emails where people ask me how I, as a Christian, can support Jewish religion. And there has also been some devaluation of Jews in France. We have seen an increasing number of cases. So have you asked yourself how it's possible that it's happening also in France? I think that the French keep silence. They remain silent towards most religions. So what are your findings? So these have been 3 questions in total. The first one will go probably to Mr. Svoboda or to Lord Alton, but it has been directed to Mrs. Szymanski. So what does United Nations do? Why don't they exclude China or Russia, which don't respect the freedom of religion?
Well, thank you for those questions, because, of course, those are the kind of things that I have to sort out also when I'm editing the Religious Freedom Report, and I do the advocacy for aid to the Church in need towards the United Nations. So, yeah, we are really up to big challenges over there, and we need all the help that we can get. You asked first that why does the map never change? And there is, of course, the need that we have to acknowledge that these attacks are because of power seeking. There is a group, either a government or an Islamic group or another organization that is trying to grab more power in a community. And the fact that there's people who think independently, who seek their own transcendence, bothers them. They are the main enemy. Finishing with pluralism in a society is the main objective of someone who wants to have a power grab. So the more authoritarian figures appear in the world, the more we are going to continue seeing it. And now, so we have here the one who is perpetrating the attack, the authoritarian government or the Islamic extremist or other extremist or Buddhist extremist, or the mobs who believe that they are superior because of their ethnic or religious background. Okay? But then you have the victims, okay? The victims, they have their religion, either because they inherited it, or is the religion of their father or of their husband, or because they were baptized, as is the case with every single Christian. You are Christian because you are baptized, not because you were born in a particular area or from a particular family, or because you married someone. It is because you are baptized. So what are we doing as victims of religious freedom violations? And it's not that we are not being victims here in the Czech Republic or in Spain or in other countries, because what happens is that us as victims refuse to see that the loss of our freedom is the loss of something like, imagine the roof of a house that has tiles. I have noticed here in Prague, they are very expert tile layers because the roofs are very beautiful and very challenging with undulations and everything. And you know what is a tiled roof, how much work it needs, attention. However, when it's the roof of our own human rights, we don't pay that much attention. And we always think that it's going to stop, that this is not going to continue. Next time there are elections, somebody else will come to protect us. I can assure you one thing. In Mosul, the Christians of Mosul, Iraq, they had been harassed for decades before the Islamic State came. And they never did anything to denounce, to complain, to stop. Instead of just protecting themselves from, oh my gosh, there's another tile missing, so I move this way. Oh no, now I cannot go to that school. my children cannot enter in that school, I cannot work in that ministry, I cannot live in that particular part of the city because it's ghetto, it's a ghetto of another religion or something. And little by little, we move away from our rights. Instead of defending them and putting back the tile, instead of saying, I have been my freedom of thought, of conscience, of religion, my freedom to circulate, my right to physical integrity is being attacked, and go to the police office and make a denunciation. We have an active power grab from the government and a passive, extremely passive attitude from the victims who are all of ourselves. So it is really a very mutual thing. That's why we are gathered here, because we have the water just going higher and higher on us. And nobody will come to pull you out of there. We have to do it ourselves. Now, the United Nations is not the forum to defend the human rights. There are commissions for each one of the human rights. There is a UN special rapporteur for freedom of religion, who is actually someone who would like to see freedom of religion isolated from freedom of thought and freedom of conscience, and is making it more difficult for us to work, because the right is called freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. We have to be very vigilant ourselves also to the United Nations of what are they doing. Lord Alton will certainly have dealt with the UN a lot as well, but we are active in that. And then
I think we can ask him.
We can ask him.
He's waiting there. So.
And then just briefly, because he knows a lot more about the Uyghur persecution, what I have found is the fact that because at the United Nations, a country asked, why aren't you Muslim countries helping the Uyghurs to escape or to obtain their peace? There was really an answer by several Arab countries which said, I have to choose my battles. I prefer not to fight with China. And if a Uyghur comes to Saudi Arabia, I deport him immediately. If
tak
a Uyghur,
pojďme.
You see?
Já do toho vstoupím teď.
Let me interrupt you. Lord Alton is present at his screen. We can see him. So let's ask him, how about politics in general? This may be a more general question. To what extent can we rely?
Nations has been raised because the United Nations has a Human Rights Council, and a member of that council elected to it is the People's Republic of China. Pakistan is also elected to it. If you look through the list of the countries that have made sure that they're elected to the United Nations Human Rights Council, you can see that some of these are the worst perpetrators of human rights violations. So I think we have to take some responsibility for this. Why are the Western countries, the democratic countries, the countries that oppose authoritarianism, why don't they insist that they get more seats on things like the Human Rights Council? And why don't they expose at the Security Council the way in which United Nations institutions have been manipulated and used by authoritarian regimes? I'll give you one example of this. I chair in the British Parliament, I'm co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on North Korea, which I visited on 4 occasions. And my good friend and colleague, who's an Australian judge, Michael Kirby, was commissioned by the United Nations to write a report on North Korea. And in it, he says that it's, his words, a state without parallel. And he describes some of the atrocities that are committed there, the vast numbers, hundreds of thousands of people who are incarcerated, including those who are incarcerated because of their religious or political beliefs. It's a shocking report, and at the end of it, in his view as a senior judicial figure, he said in the technical sense, he believes that what is happening in North Korea constitute crimes against humanity. And the report ended up with a recommendation. After all, he'd been commissioned by the United Nations to write this report. His recommendation to them was that this should be referred to the International Criminal Court for a prosecution. But of course, that requires the agreement of the Security Council. And who sit on the Security Council? Well, China and Russia, countries that are, I think the only country that China has a treaty with, a foreign partnership, formal treaty with, is North Korea. They're never going to refer this to the International Criminal Court. So we have to break that sort of logjam and create institutions that do what they were set up to do. Rabbi Lemkin, the extraordinary Polish Jewish lawyer who coined the word genocide, was the inspiration behind the Genocide Convention. We owe it to his legacy, to his memory, to uphold that legacy. You heard what Rabbi Baker said a few minutes ago about the atrocities that were committed in the past, but the anti-Semitism that continues to this day. We have always got to guard against these things, and we have to use whatever fora we are able to do. Now, at an international level, why is it that Muslim countries, a point that was raised earlier on, have not spoken out more against what has happened to the Uyghurs in China? One of the reasons is partly because of the Belt and Road ownership of so many countries today. Many developing countries have huge debts to China for massive projects which they have allowed the Chinese to build for them. One of those countries is Pakistan. So when I went to Pakistan to raise the issue of Asia Bibi, who was referred to earlier on, and mercifully and happily, Asia was ultimately freed, thanks to the Supreme Court judges in Pakistan, who are good and courageous men. They risked all of the reaction that there was bound to be by allowing Asia, who had been sentenced to death for blasphemy. This was an illiterate woman who couldn't even write, let alone set out blasphemous statements against the Prophet. This was a lot of nonsense from beginning to end, but she spent years in prison. Why wasn't anything done about this by the Muslim nations? Why hadn't Pakistan done anything about it? And when I spoke at the Islamic University in Lahore, I asked that question of some of the academics there. And privately, they said to me after the session was over, they said, it is because we are so indebted now to China, no one wants to upset them. And this, I'm afraid, is writ large across many developing nations. So we have to be very wary of this and recognize that, unlike the former Soviet Union, the Chinese Communist Party has huge economic power, and they deploy it in our own Western democracies, the buying up of institutions, of universities, of companies. Their tentacles are everywhere, and I think we have to be a lot clearer about that. One final point on this question is, what can we do at a more localized level in our own parliaments? Well, here in the UK Parliament, for instance, we establish all-party parliamentary groups to examine things like freedom of religion or belief. I was one of the initiators of that group. We have over 130 members from the House of Lords and the House of Commons, across both houses, who are members of that group. And it regularly raises these issues that I've been referring to in debates. It regularly raises them in parliamentary questions, in letters to ministers, in meetings with ministers. It helped to persuade the Prime Minister to appoint a special envoy on freedom of religion or belief, who's my excellent colleague, Fiona Bruce, Member of Parliament. So these are the kinds of things that we can do. And we can have grassroots campaigns as well. That's what Red Wednesday is all about. It's making people more alive to the 250 million Christians who are persecuted worldwide. And that's even before you begin to think about the Rohingya Muslims or the Uyghur Muslims or the situation of Baha'is in Iran, or non-believers like Alexander Arn, whose case I took up, who was given a 4-year prison sentence in Indonesia for simply putting on his Facebook site that he didn't believe in God, or the bloggers in Bangladesh who were murdered for saying that they didn't believe in God. Article 18 is about the right not to believe as well as the right to believe. So we need to form much stronger alliances with people like humanists, non-believers, but also Muslims, many of whom share our concerns about what is happening to people like the Uyghurs and the Rohingya. And I think, therefore, we have to do more. We mustn't just complain about it. My mother was Irish, and her first language was Irish, not English. But she had lots of phrases that have stuck with me even into now my old age. And one of them was always that it's better to light a candle than it is to curse in the dark. Better to light a candle than to curse in the dark. I think that wasn't bad advice. Oh, I might add, by the way, that Rabbi Baker referred to the rise of anti-Semitism. It was our former chief rabbi in this country, the wonderful and greatly lamented Jonathan Sacks, Lord Sacks. He wrote 2 books that I would recommend to everyone on this call today. Particularly, he wrote a lot of books, but these 2 in particular. One is called The Home We Build Together. It's about learning to respect one another and to live alongside one another, to coexist, and to realize the beauty of one another's traditions. And the other book I would recommend is called The Dignity of Difference, which recognizes that every single human being is different from another, and that we all, regardless of our color, our sex, our creed, our orientation, our backgrounds, our abilities, we are precious, and our dignity as well as our rights needs to be upheld.
Tak děkujeme. Pojďme ještě krátce na...
Thank you. Just very briefly, the question about anti-Semitism in France. Rabbi Baker, please. Why anti-Semitism is rising in France?
I will answer that, but I want to make an additional comment to comments that Pavel had made at the end of his remarks regarding this challenge of ritual slaughter. In fact, the Jewish community in Belgium, when it confronted legislation that was adopted in Belgium that banned the practice of kosher slaughter, went to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg precisely with the expectation that the court would say the Belgian government is required to provide an exception for religious slaughter. But in fact, the court ruled differently. The court ruled that the government had no obligation to do so. It could do so, but it was free to work out its own balance between this idea of animal rights and the protection of religious freedom. And in fact, EU member states are free to adopt their own legislation. So it is what has become quite recently very troubling for Jewish communities. They will point out that these same governments frequently make exceptions on cultural grounds for the right of hunters to hunt animals, where many more animals are slaughtered than are slaughtered through the process of kosher slaughter, and lead them to wonder whether cultural tradition has more sway than religious obligations. So that's to that issue. To France, France has the largest Jewish community in Europe. It confronted the problem of anti-Semitism probably more directly and severely than any place else in Europe, beginning in the early 2000s. Jews in France were victims of multiple lethal attacks. Now, I have to say, in France, the government has stepped forward in a number of ways, but at the same time, the overall situation is constrained by aspects of French law and tradition. To the former, you've had considerable security provided for synagogues, schools, other Jewish institutions by the government, even by the military. You have a special prefect with the responsibility of fighting racism and anti-Semitism, and is really trying to marshal efforts across individual ministries. These are all to the government's credit. But at the same time, France has this tradition of laïcité, of secularity, that really has prevented the sorts of things that could be helpful and the sorts of things that in various other countries are really quite natural. So if you cannot have any, or at least it's frowned upon to have any public expression of religious identity, even getting religious figures, religious communities to speak out publicly against anti-Semitism, something we do in America, we do here, it's, I think, reflected here, is simply not done in France. Even collecting information based on religion is constrained. I had the experience some years back of meeting with the education ministry, and I raised the very real problem that was evident in the Jewish community and in the country. Jewish kids were leaving the public schools in large numbers. They were being harassed by their non-Jewish fellow students. The education official said to me, "But we don't know this." They knew it, But officially, they didn't know it because they can't keep any such data. So I think these are a couple of the examples that illustrate the very real challenges that Jews in France face. And again, because it's such a significant population, it really does bode ill for the future. Even the French president has said, without its Jews, France would not be France. And yet a significant percentage of Jews in France wonder whether their future is still in that country.
Děkujeme. Tak další otázky. Někdo se tady hlásil? Ano.
We have more questions here, please. Feel free to ask. I am the Armenian ambassador to the Czech Republic.
So I will have just a reflection and alert very quickly. I'm very happy and proud to be today in this conference. It's the first time we are here, and we hope that with an embassy, and I'll also ask the Armenian Apostolic Church, which is in Prague, to join this initiative next year. I would like to thank the Lord David Alton for his extensive narrative of the Armenian genocide, and would like to acknowledge and thank the British Parliament for accepting and recognizing the Armenian genocide in first reading. What is the alert? I would like to tell you that my nation these days is an Armenian cultural heritage and under strong Armenophobic influence is destroyed after the Azerbaijani aggression on Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh with support of Turkey. And today we have a damage of a lot of the Armenian churches in Nagorno-Karabakh, destroying them, damaging them, changing the character of the Armenian church. So this is what is not very much known or popular in the daily news, but this is what is happening these days when I'm even talking to you already on the territory of the Republic of Armenia. Thank you for this conference. Thank you for your thoughts. I would like to also welcome Rabbi Baker, my former colleague in OSCE. So that's it. Just
Děkujeme. Děkujeme za tuhle připomínku.
Thank you. But I would like to say that Czech journalists actually do mention this topic, even though it is not enough, but they actually do write about it. Do we have any other questions, please? Tomáš Kraus. I don't have a question, only a remark. Probably most of you know Franz Werfel was mentioned here, and as the author of this book, I have to say that Franz Werfel was a Prague Jew, and he was born not far from here, and he was a friend of my father's. So your father has been mentioned twice here in two very differing stories, so to say. We have a few minutes left, so I would like to give the floor to Lord Alton, and I would like to ask him what is his vision for Red Wednesday and for the whole question of freedom of religion in the future. So what is your view?
What was just said about Franz Werfel, and that will give me an even greater reason to try and visit Prague again at some time in the not too distant future. Much as I like being here at Westminster, I would also love to be able to travel again. I'm sure so many more people would do too. The Armenian ambassador talked about the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. I visited Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia and Azerbaijan, and I agree with what he has just said, and it is appalling to see the atrocities that have been committed against Armenian people in Karabakh. My good friend and colleague, Baroness Caroline Cox, runs a small NGO called Heart, and they recently published a new report about the situation in Karabakh, and I would be very happy if anyone would like to see that, that you have the details of how it can be obtain, but Lady Cox has visited Karabakh during this most recent conflict, and she's been in Armenia. This is a woman who's in her 80s. She's a retired nurse, professor of nursing by background, a most formidable lady. I've travelled with her in some very difficult parts of the world, and she is one of the great champions of freedom of religion or belief, and her report is well worth reading. I might also add, by the way, that under Erdogan, we've not only seen a heightening and a continuation of some of the determination of the Ottoman Turks to liquidate the Armenian people, because that was certainly the objective of the Armenian genocide. But we've seen the same kind of methods being used when it comes to Kurdish people. The use of white phostrogen, for instance, as well in attacks, which ought to be listed but is not, as a chemical weapon, and the terrible burning of children, especially. The Times newspaper here carried some shocking reports about what had happened to civilians as a result, both in Karabakh and in Kurdish-speaking areas in Syria, of the use of what should be completely banned, in my opinion, and that had been provided by Turkey. So what more can we do? What's the vision for Red Wednesday? Well, the original idea, I was on the board of Aid to the Church in Need. It was just something I suggested, as I thought we needed some way of popularizing, helping people to understand in their imaginations that Article 18, which I've mentioned a lot, had become an orphaned right. That it was there are 30 rights listed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but this one, Article 18, was one almost that people from politically correct backgrounds did not want to go anywhere near, and we had to re-engage with that. So that was the inspiration behind Red Wednesday. I mean, I've seen it grow across the world. My view is that it's up to local people in their own jurisdictions to do as you've done in the Czech Republic and in Prague, and to hold your events to work out what works best for you. And using the kind of data that has been produced by Aid to the Church in Need, but there are other organizations too, such as Open Doors and Christian Solidarity Worldwide, CSW, who provide brilliant resources as well. So we need to inform ourselves better. I think we need to be more active inside all parliaments and legislatures in free societies, setting up groups like the one that I talked about. And I think that using individual cases, I mean, I mentioned a brilliant, wonderful Chinese woman earlier on, Zhang Zhen. In passing, I mentioned one of the pastors as well, who has been in prison now for 3 years. The United Nations has said this is an example of arbitrary detention and arrest. It was a rare example of them speaking out against the People's Republic of China, but he is still in prison. We need to adopt people like him and Zhang Zhen and popularize their stories and make sure that legislators are raising their cases with their governments, as we do in the United Kingdom Parliament, so that constantly these reports then go back to Beijing to show that we haven't forgotten who these people are. So I think the vision is down to everybody to make this, to use this tool. It's all it is. It's a tool, part of a toolkit in growing a massive appreciation for the scale of persecution worldwide and popularizing again Article 18 in the way that Eleanor Roosevelt and those who drafted the Universal Declaration would have wished.
Tak děkujeme.
Thank you, Lord Alton. Greetings to Baroness Cox. She's a wonderful woman. I think she would have been a great guest here as well. So thank you again for joining us from London, from Westminster. And I would like to thank other panelists as well. Now we have a short break and we will meet at 3:15, 15:15. So that's easy to remember. And for those who are online, you don't have to switch off your computers. And let's meet at 3:15 again.
Okay, I think that it's time that we start after the break. Thank you for the first panel, which has been very interesting. And we are now going to start with the second panel with the title, How Can We Help? How can I help? Many people will say, how can I help as an individual? So we're here in Central Europe. We can't have an impact on what is going on in Africa or elsewhere. But everyone says that. Of course, there will be no impact. But let's jointly say, let's do something about it. That's the purpose of this conference. And we have to mention that we, or you watching us, were under oppression in terms of religion, and especially those oppressed could feel what it means to be persecuted. And now they cherish the freedom which is significantly higher than, for example, corruption and other phenomena. And these people think that they owe something to the people who are being persecuted now. And perhaps because we have experienced this, then we think that we are living in a privileged area of the world. And some people use what is, say, political correctness, but we try, there are many people who adopt a neutral approach that excludes responsibility, but the freedom of religion or belief is one of the fundamental rights. It's one of the most fundamental freedoms, which then leads to other freedoms. And this is the key for a better situation in the key other areas of this world. There will be 5 speakers in this panel. Director of Caritas Czech Republic, Lukáš Curylo, head of one of the missions in Mosul in Iraq, Olivier Poquion, who will be online, Slovak politician and newly also the plenipotentiary of the government of the Slovak Republic for the protection of freedom of religion, Anna Záborská, member of Chamber of Deputies of the Parliament of the Czech Republic, Marian Jurečka. And once again, we will have a presentation by a representative of the Ecumenical Council of Churches in the Czech Republic, Petr Vinš. At the end of this panel, we will again have a discussion, a Q&A session. So I would like to remind you that there will be no Q&A after the individual presentations. There will be just one Q&A session at the end of the panel. And if you watch us online, please send your questions in the chat. And Monica, please introduce the first speaker. The first speaker is Lukáš Curylo, representing an organization which really helps at the place where it's most needed, because it's director of Caritas Czech Republic, which operates in the Czech Republic and abroad. In 2007, he became the director of the diocesan charity of Ostrava-Opava, and since 2012, he has been the head of the national charity Czech Republic. He was also a member of the executive committee of Charity Europe, and since 2015, he has been a member of the European Economic and Social Committee. Welcome, and the floor is yours. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before starting my presentation, I would like to say a few words about Caritas Czech Republic. As has been said, we also operate abroad. This is something that is not so known in the Czech Republic. Everyone knows that we operate mostly in the Czech Republic. Of course, our mission is to help people in our country. We have more than 200,000 permanent clients, and there are about 8,800 employees that we have. Over the past 20 years, we also provided services abroad. We operate in 20 countries of the whole world. We help various communities in various countries with various religious beliefs. And why am I saying this at the beginning? It is because charitable organizations, for example, Caritas Internationalis, the second largest organization in the world providing charitable services, have some principles that are also binding for us. And charity is an inherent part of the Catholic Church, and its primary mission and its fundamental role is humanitarian aid. The humanitarian aid is provided in a specific manner, and it is based on purely Christian values or Catholic values. This is how it does the evangelical service. That is why I will say that we provide service through love, because our service is, in fact, love. Our budget is about 300 million Czech crowns, and thanks to this money we can provide our aid and support in the countries. Our aid is twofold. So first of all, this is development aid, which means that we stay in certain countries for a long period of time and we try to support the needy, and we try to help them with various humanitarian or human issues. And then we provide humanitarian aid, which is the immediate response to certain disasters, hurricanes and other natural disasters. For example, in Iraq, however, it's no longer humanitarian or development aid. It's aid that is complementary. And we call it Nexus. And at the end of my speech, I would like to say a few words about this Nexus aid, because Red Wednesday, including a fundraising concert, will provide support to the community center of the Our Lady Church in Mosul, and Father Oliver will be speaking about this church in a while. He will tell us a few words about the project. So what is it basically about? In case of humanitarian aid, we are supporting the reconstruction of building and housing in various countries. Conflicts and natural disasters lead to a situation in which people have to leave their homes. They only come back after a few years, and they find out that the residential and economic buildings are dilapidated, they've been burnt out, and so on. That is why our aid focuses especially on the reconstruction of these buildings, on providing the supply of water, of electricity, so that the people can come back to these buildings and they can have a high quality of life again. This is not easy at all. Very often we help in regions of countries where the war conflicts or the natural disasters happen repeatedly. So it's very hard to reconstruct your home for the 5th time, or to re-establish your farm for the 7th time, to put the family together and to find a reason for living again. And local churches play an important role here, including Catholic churches, even in the Muslim environment. Catholic churches play also a very important role in the social and economic area. It's more important than here in Europe. In Europe, we live a luxurious life also in terms of waste and the level of life. And for us, charity is something as a spiritual help. It's something done as a tradition. But in third countries and in other countries where we operate, it's different. People identify with the church as with a family. They rely on the church. It provides not only spiritual support, but it also provides education, an opportunity for doing business. It gives them a source for living, and also it takes care of their free time. In Middle East, some of our partners want support from us, and they think that they will start building hospitals and reconstructing the churches. And this is what they do, but the second thing that they are interested in is, for example, the community center or the park in a given district, because without having the people there, they don't need to do anything. So it's a completely different approach in the countries. And that is why our principle is that we involve local people in our missions. And we try to involve them from the very beginning until the end of the project. We as Europeans find it very hard to understand their motives and their behavior. Development aid relies on institutions in a given place. When leaving the mission, we try to ensure that the society can live independently. We can provide funds, we can provide know-how, motivation, some psychological support, but it's all up to them because we don't live there permanently, and it's not our purpose to live there permanently. They need to build the community by themselves. And again, churches, and especially the Catholic Church, play an important role. Very often they are non-Catholics. We may not even know what religion they have, but we motivate them to work for our organizations. And this may be hard to accept for the Catholic organization. It's hard for them to accept support by a Turkish man or, for example, a Muslim. But it's part of the ecumenism, part of looking for the synergies between the individual religions and individual worlds. And I think this is correct. Our principles are clear. As for the documents, we cannot make everyone Catholic. So if we go back to the encyclical of the Pope, this is something that should be emphasized. Our role is not to motivate to our religion, not to our belief. We are not supposed to make everyone a Christian. But we should provide the service or the charity of love. When I explain the concept based on misericord, which means to be close to someone who is in a need, that is the role of Evangelium Samaritana. So we don't care about religion, about nationality, about the minority, ethnic minority. We just help the person to cope with his situation so that he can live a good life. And why? And this is based on the Christian principles of charity, because at the heart of everything there is a human being who has inseparable dignity. This does not relate to the social position, to color, to gender. It's guaranteed by God. It means that anyone working in a charitable organization must think that our client is Jesus Christ. And this is something that differentiates us from other charitable organizations. That is why we can also operate in other non-Christian countries, and we are still respected, because for us, every human being has inseparable dignity. We, of course, have to respect also religious traditions and the customs if they protect human dignity. And if human dignity is violated, then we would warn about this, because it's our moral principle to speak about such phenomena. We don't accept sexual violence, and we want all partners to use transparent procedures to be against bribery and corruption, so that funds are not misused. In Europe, this may seem simple, but in the third world, this is something that is very complicated, to find a serious partner who will have the same attitude to use of financial funds. Because if you give him a receipt and sometimes you are not sure that the partner will really use it for the purpose intended. And we work with millions, of course. So we need to establish the conditions which will make both the clients and the donors happy, because we guarantee the high quality of service. And we guarantee that the money will not disappear somewhere. So this is our key role in the third world. Another important principle is that we support local economy and local products. These are projects, minor projects, ensuring that the people will know how to do business. For example, we establish farms and we tell them how to cooperate. With Marian Jurečka, we went to Mosul. It was about 1.5 years after liberation of Mosul, and we were surprised to see how Muslims lived together with Christians, because they had been living together for centuries. They are mutually dependent on one another. And you know about the hatred that should be there, but they don't hate each other. Of course, Christians were very much persecuted there, so that's why we support the Christians, because they were most affected by the Islamic State. But despite this, when we visited the churches, the Muslims were preparing tea for us. So that's the usual way of living there, and they know how to do this. And very often the problems come because of fundamentalism or because of the world powers.
To get back to a specific project in Iraq, because that's something that Father Olivier is going to speak about. In Iraq, we started working in 2015 when the Islamic state was still active in Iraq. Erbil was our center. It's quite strategic because it has a military base, a U.S. military base, and an airport. And since we had this background there, we started to be active in the area of health, education, and agriculture. And we were waiting for the Islamic State to recede. At that time, Mosul was occupied for 2 years by the Islamic State, and it's not far from Erbil. In 2017, the east of Mosul was liberated in January, and then the rest in July. And more than 700,000 inhabitants lost their livelihoods and homes. 1.5 million Christians lived in Iraq before, and now there are only 400,000. So the decrease is enormous, and they now live in a diaspora in other countries, and they are still considering whether they should ever come back, because the situation is not good at all in terms of stability, economy, and the freedom of faith. To be precise, we are in a valley in Erbil, and we collaborate with the local church and the local administration. And we were among the first to be able to have our own registered branch in 2015. It was very difficult because obviously the whole administrative background is completely different there, and it was really tough so that we could have our own branch being a Christian organization in Iraq. And thanks to this branch, we were able to start helping in the field. Thank you for your attention. I can see that my time is up, but I'm ready to answer your questions. Unfortunately, I have to stop you. But it is very interesting indeed, and I think we will get back to it in our Q&A session, and I will give the floor to the next speaker. The second speaker will speak about similar topics. I believe it's Mr. Olivier Poquion, who is a Catholic he is a Dominican, and he is active in Mosul, and he's also a chaplain of the Roman Catholic Foreigners for Kurdistan and northern Iraq since September 2019, and he has also served as a chaplain in the Balkans, Africa, and the Middle East. He's also an expert. He served also as an expert of the Holy See to the Council of Europe. And since we have a fundraising concert here today, it will help specifically this mission in Iraq. And I will now give the floor to Father Olivier.
Good evening, everybody. I hope that you can hear me as well as I can hear you here from Iraq tonight. I'm very sorry not to have been able to join you, but the situation is like this today. So this evening, I wanted to thank you for, first of all, your fraternity. You know that Pope Francis visited Iraq this year, and that was of great importance. Iraq is usually on the top of the media concern when something difficult is happening, when a war is taking place, when a massacre is occurring. This year, we had the surprise, and for the first time in 2 millenniums, to have the Pope visit. This visit helped us to understand that we were sharing the same problematics, whatever was our community, whatever was our belonging, religious, ethnic, or linguistic belonging. He came first to the south of Iraq, to Ur in Chaldea, this place of origin of Abraham, the father of believers, of all believers, and helped us to understand that we had a common origin. And then, having this common origin, we were sharing the same responsibility. So tonight I didn't accept to come first because of the fundraising operation, because I didn't know about it, but to participate to this Red Wednesday. Pavel Svoboda invited me several times in the past when I was serving at the EU, and now I'm back in the field. As several speakers said, we are focusing on human beings. We are focusing on persons. I will try to share with you my screen to show you where we live in Mosul. And you will see Mosul 2 years ago and how are things progressing those days. Here I am. I was sent to Mosul 2 years ago in order to participate to a program that is run by UNESCO and called Reviving the Spirit of Mosul. Following the occupation by the so-called Islamic State, many places of worship have been UNESCO, thanks to the finances of the Arabic United Emirates, decided to rebuild the Great Mosque, but also 2 Christian churches following the visit of Pope Francis in Abu Dhabi. We are now making progresses to restore what is at the crossroad of Mosul. But this crossroad and this old city has been under the winter of violent occupation for 2 years. When we speak about 2 years, we should speak about 20 years of persecution. Persecution of minority members, but also persecution of many people because of their belief inside Islam. We are all together trying to get out of this situation, but facing rebels, unexploded devices, lack of livelihood, and still lack of economic perspective. When we first entered our priory, this is how it looked. This place has been built nearly 3 centuries ago by Italian and French Dominicans to serve the local church. Like what was explained about the action of Caritas, we did serve the local churches, whether they were Catholic or non-Catholic, and we served also the local people. So this place was the place where was established the first school for girls and the first school teaching teachers, female teachers. You can see the place, how it was when we took control of it back. We suffered from those persecutions, but the good point is that everybody suffered together. Some people were expelled, like the Christians. Some other people, like the Yazidis, have been enslaved, and some people have been killed. Together, we had to face those realities. And now, together, we are trying to rebuild. As you can see, the old city of Mosul, the last to be freed at the end of the occupation, is not made of separated neighborhoods. Mosul was the only city of the former Ottoman Empire not to be split into neighborhoods. We were living together, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Yazidis, Turkmen, Kurdish people with different languages, but sharing the same reality. Mosul is a crossroad, and our place, Our Lady of the Hour, is also at the crossroad of the old city. This is how was the priory 2 years ago. It was difficult in some places to make a difference between what was a street and what was a house. it was difficult to recognize the refectory. For example, when I entered our place, the refectory has just disappeared. And we found the humanity was still alive. There was some neighbors waiting for us to come back. All the Christians being expelled, our neighbors were Muslims, and they were relying economically and also in terms of education on the churches and on the churches' activities. Fights didn't destroy only properties and belongings. They first of all destroyed the ability to live together. When we are trying to rebuild stones, it is by rebuilding trust. You see here Christian and Muslim workers working together to clean this place that was hosting the first school for girls. It was a tremendous work to start as a rehabilitation program by demining. There was a lot of unexploded devices, and it was difficult to sort away what was historical heritage, what was trash, what has to be removed. But in this context of chaos, we constituted a team. As you can see, there was few women, but the only woman part of the team at that time was a Muslim, and most of the workers were Muslims also. So this is a crossroad. The key element for us to come back to normal was the visit of Pope Francis. When you want to honor somebody in the Middle East, you don't invite this person. You pay a visit to that family. And this is what Pope Francis did. He didn't come only to visit the capital. He came also in this place where for centuries we have been living together. We lived with Yazidi, with Shia, with Sunni, with tribal people, with people from the cities, and together we are now focusing on the youth. Iraq is composed of many components, Shia in the south, Sunni people in the north, but also people of different religions. What is common to all is the youth. 40% of the population is under 14 years old. This is for them that we are rebuilding. When the Pope came, he wanted to meet with the people. He wanted to see. He came in the middle of the rebels. He came not to help, but to do together. He promoted a partnership called human fraternity. As you can see, this is how was the same priory you have seen at the beginning during the Pope visits. Cleared from landmine, cleared from rebels. But now, even if the Pope visit opened the way to other dignitaries, and if we have been able to re-celebrate Mass 3 times already in our church, we need to involve the youth. The youth group that came there, for some of them, they were born in Mosul. Some were born in Kurdistan and have never seen the city of their ancestors. Now, some of them want to come back. But in order to come back, they need some economic perspectives. Economy is today the key element of our ecosystem. Whether it is a church, whether it is a mosque, the church, the mosque, the temple are relying on the shops surrounding them. The shops are together with also apartments where the shopkeepers can live. And if we can get some support to rebuild churches or mosques, nobody is currently supporting churches or religious organizations to rebuild their economic capacity. This is where we are waiting for you tonight. As you can see, those shops were fixed as we could by very simple ways, but they are still in very bad condition. We cannot host families today in those places, not because of lack of security, but because of the situation of the buildings. Those buildings have been occupied by Daesh and by other actors. They are currently under threat. If we cannot restore them, repair them, or demolish them, they can be saved by other actors. And this is why we are doing our best to involve the local communities and together with all neighbors to restore, to revive the spirit of Mosul. Thank you very much, and I will be very pleased to answer your questions.
Tak to je fascinující příběh.
This is a truly fascinating story, and it's great to see Mosul from a completely different side. Of course, we know Mosul only from the news, but when you can see it from the inside, it's completely different. So what's the next speech? The next speaker, female speaker, will be Anna Záborská, who came from Slovakia. In September this year, she was appointed the plenipotentiary for freedom of religion or belief, which is a great step. And Mrs. Záborská has been in politics for many years. At the turn of the millennium, she served 2 terms as a member of the National Council of the Slovak Republic. In 2020, she was re-elected for the 3rd time. From 2004 to 2019, she was a member of the European Parliament. And since 2019, she has been the president of the Christian Union. She currently leads the delegation of the National Council of the Slovak Republic in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, dear representatives of religious organizations and various faiths, Your Excellencies. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers on this conference, which is very significant and very useful in our world. I would also like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It is a great honor for me. I would specifically like to thank my friend Pavel Svoboda. Freedom, security, and life are still at risk. More than 30 years ago, many said that democracy or the concept of human rights had finally triumphed. This was not and is not true. We believers already knew this when some announced the so-called end of history with a triumphant smile. We know that the end of history looks differently. We've seen many prophets come by and all have been wrong so far. What we do know is that we must work as hard as we can to make the world a better place. Unfortunately, the world is still a dangerous place. According to many studies, it is Christians or believers in general who are the most endangered and the most persecuted group. A group that has the most victims. The degree, intensity, or geographical extent of persecution is increasing. Even in our own countries, we are already witnessing not only verbal but also physical attacks. So far, they are more focused on buildings, but whenever I reflect on this situation, I am reminded of the words of a bishop from the Middle East, from Iraq, whom I met some years ago in the European Parliament. Archbishop Kasmusa said, "First they ignored us, then they laughed at us, finally they drove us out and killed us, And all this was accompanied by a deafening silence. Let's recall the words of Tomáš Kraus, what he said at the beginning of this conference. A few days ago, his words about silence rang in my head again. I mean, the archbishops. Two leading journalists from Slovakia's largest opinion-forming daily were poking fun on social media at a young artist who was guilty of publicly expressing her faith. Unfortunately, we have become accustomed to insults. Western society is getting incredibly rude, but what I refuse to get used to, and we all are, is silence. At least the silence of a part of the elites. In this case, thank God, at least part of the liberal elite has spoken up. Part of it. The newspaper itself did not activate its code of ethics. After public pressure, its editor-in-chief issued a statement that didn't say much, and it was certainly not an apology. She obviously didn't consider the matter a problem. One of the two journalists apologized while the other one refused to. In this case, at least some people didn't stay silent, but the silence is spreading. And people are joining in open hates against young people apparently uninvolved in public cultural and value disputes. But they are clearly ignoring indiscriminate attacks against religious leaders or public figures professing a religion and its values. I see this as a huge problem, even here in the West.
I can see this as a problem in Europe and in the world. I want to talk here about our systemic approach to this topic in Slovakia, what we are planning to do about it, what our own convictions are, and what principles of work we want to apply. The topic of persecution of Christians or believers in general has been discussed in Slovakia for several years. This was also expressed in the declaration of the National Council of the Slovak Republic on the protection of freedom or religion or belief and assistance to persecuted Christians and other religious communities in the world from the 10th of September 2019, which clearly expressed Slovakia's position on this issue, and I quote, "The National Council of the Slovak Republic, referring to Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and Article 24 of the Constitution of the Slovak Republic, pursuant to which freedom of religion or belief is a fundamental human right, recalling the restrictions on freedom of religion or belief in Slovakia in the 20th century, especially the persecution of Jews during the period of the Slovak state and the persecution of the Christian churches during the decades of the communist regime, recalling the significance of the candle demonstration on the Good Friday of the 25th of March 1988, which was a significant statement by Slovak society in favor of civil and religious freedoms, and which resonated throughout the world and contributed to the social movement leading to the fall of the Iron Curtain, calls on the government of the Slovak Republic to increase interministerial efforts in the area of protection of freedom of religion or belief and assistance to persecuted Christians and other religious communities around the world. This resolution of deputies, which reflects our past and its dark side, became the basis for the decision of the government of the Slovak Republic in September this year to establish the office of the Government Plenipotentiary for Freedom of Religion and Belief, and to appoint me as the first plenipotentiary. At the same time, the government approved the statute of the office of the plenipotentiary and gave it a relatively broad mandate. The plenipotentiary is to carry out tasks in the field of the protection of freedom of religion or belief and to implement systemic measures to help respect the freedom of religion or belief in the world. Also, the plenipotentiary is to implement systemic measures to protect the strengthening of freedom of religion or belief and to build awareness in the Slovak Republic in the following areas: the contribution of churches and religious societies to civil and social life, the importance of freedom of religion or belief as a pillar of democratic societies, and a fundamental indicator of development and prosperity in the world, the need for inter-religious dialogue and the prevention of religious extremism. Today, this office is being established, and we want that as of the 1st of January 2022, we can fully fulfill the tasks defined in the statute by the government of the Slovak Republic. In implementing the statute, we will be guided by a number of principles. Freedom of religion and belief is a fundamental, universal right and cannot be bargained away. The solution is not to evict persecuted persons to other areas, but to resolve the conflicts in a political or military manner on the spot with the involvement of the communities living there and their leaders. Humanitarian and development aid for the suffering should be implemented where violence and injustice is taking place. Formation of community elites in the affected regions, and not turning a blind eye to injustice wherever and to whomever it happens, in Slovakia or abroad, in the European Union or in third countries. And this is something that is very similar to what has been said by Mr. Tsurilo about his activities and the activities of their organization in Mosul and other countries. These are the principles that I profess as the Slovak government's plenipotentiary for freedom of religion and belief. My office has only just been established, and that's why I'm talking about the principles of operation and of the objectives. We have a lot of work ahead of us to be able to implement our principles in concrete measures and projects. At the same time, we are aware that Slovakia is a small player in international relations, but even smaller players can make a big difference in functioning alliances when focusing on specific issues. And this is and will be our goal, to act in synergy with our partners abroad, also with the Czech Republic, where we share the concern for freedom of religion and belief. We see as our main partners the countries here in Central Europe, especially the countries associated in the V4. In addition to what I have mentioned, I also want to emphasize work within the Slovak Republic and to emphasize the problems of respect towards people of different religions or beliefs. As mentioned earlier, both Slovakia and the countries of the European Union have a growing problem with openness towards people of different faith or those with no religious belief. There is an increasing number of hate attacks, and if we don't stop it now, it might be too late in a few years' time, and we might be facing the same problems that we discuss here from the other parts of the world. I've been given the mandate by the Slovak government to come up with programs and measures that will shape the mindset, especially of the young people, so that they realize that the freedom of religion and belief is at the very heart of Western civilization, and that even excessive secularism can present a threat. By this I mean the secularism that dreams of a supposed neutrality of public debate or the state. We have learned a lesson from the communist experience, and we know that there is no such thing. We all have our convictions, and we behave accordingly. And if our civilization is to survive, we must acknowledge this, and we must learn again to live in mutual respect. And to live in mutual respect. Tolerance is not sufficient in this case. I see my role as a plenipotentiary as very important for my country. A lot of people speak about hatred, but it's often as if some of the victims didn't bother about the growth of hatred. The truth is still the truth, and we must have a respect. That's the key for future. We need to learn that again, and my job is to draw attention to that and to propose programs and measures to promote this issue in the media, in education, in social networks, and in interpersonal communication. I think we have a long way to go. I am deeply convinced that if we collaborate at home and abroad, we'll be able to meet the challenges of our time, the challenges relating to the growth of intolerance based on faith or belief. Dear friends, I count on your support and your cooperation. Thank you very much.
V téhle věci určitě budeme.
We will definitely help you. We will definitely help you in this respect. Since the separation of Czechoslovakia, we try to monitor what's happening in Slovakia, and Slovakia sometimes comes first with this type of projects, and that's one of the areas in which you are ahead of the Czech Republic, because to have a plenipotentiary for religious freedom, that's not a minor step. So congratulations to our Slovak brothers. What's the next presentation? The fourth speaker will be Marian Jurečka, member of the Chamber of Deputies of the Parliament of the Czech Republic and chairman of the Christian Democratic Union. We must also mention that he visited Iraq many times during the fights of the Islamic State and also after liberation of Mosul. And he could map the situation in the affected regions, and he also met a few personal stories of people who lost their homes, sources of living and churches. And I'm passing the floor to Mr. Jurečka, who will tell us about his experience.
Thank you. Have a nice afternoon. Greetings to everyone, to panelists, to guests, and to everyone who is not indifferent. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. I hope this will be more lively, and I will send around 2 publications, 2 books that you can pass on, also for the panelists, because these brochures are related to what I'm going to share with you. But let me start with a positive story so that we are not so glum and skeptical about what is going on in the world. I remember that in 2016 I had the opportunity to visit Senegal, and I went there 3 months after the visit of Cardinal Volk. And the representatives of the government in Dakar told me about how Cardinal Volk came and brought the baby Jesus from Prague. And they were really excited about this. And on the first day of the visit, the cardinal was greeted in a mosque by Muslim representatives, and also the representatives of all other active churches in Dakar were invited. And on the second day, there was this ceremony, the Czech baby Jesus being given to the Christian representatives, and the Christian church has only 4% in Dakar. The rest, or most of them are Muslims, 92%. And again, everybody was invited, all the various churches. So it is an example of the fact that there are places in the world where the relationship between Christians, Muslims, and other religions, including the representation of the state, are good, and that it works. I'm saying this by way of introduction, so that there is inspiration, there is hope for things to work elsewhere as well. But now, very briefly, my story from Iraq. I was the Minister of Agriculture, and I received the offer to come to Iraq, to the Kurdistan in 2016. When I arrived to the ministry, I was asking what is the role of the Minister of Agriculture in this country where there is fighting going on. And there was indeed a problem with agriculture for a day and a half. I visited places around Erbil, Duhok and other places. We were 20 kilometers from the war military line, so I really saw the places where the war was going on. And you actually see the craters created by the mines. And we also had the opportunity to speak people from the refugee camps and with those who help them, with locals and with the representatives of various denominations, Christian, Muslim, or Yazidis. And this was very important for us because they were happy that people from the EU came, that they are showing interest and they are representing a government that actively helps in that country. So this is something that energizes them. And of course, then you come back with a lot of different stories and with a different viewpoint than what you can get from the media. And with Lukáš Curylo, who mentioned it as well, I had the opportunity to visit the region 2 years later. We went to Karakosh, to Mosul, 2 years after the liberation, and after the liberation 2 years later. And the pictures that were shown by Father Olivier are actually either the same places or similar places. And we also brought some financial help to these places. And after the visit in 2018, we were there with other businessmen. So they also organized a fundraising concert, and in cooperation with TV Noe, it brought 1.2 million crowns that went to that region. So you can be a politician or a normal citizen, and you can help. Today the conference is called How Can I Help? And I have 10 very short ways of helping. I will mention them. How can I help as a Christian or as a believer? The basis is praying for those who are persecuted for faith and for those who persecute. That's something that we can all do, maybe even to a limited extent. What can I do as a citizen? As a citizen, I think what I can do is to support Caritas, for example, and its activities abroad, or other organizations that support the conflict areas where people are persecuted for faith. What can I do as a politician? I think I have mentioned this a little bit already, but as Mrs. Záborská said, the politician has a greater role. It can influence the position of the parliament, of the national parliament, of the European Parliament, to formulate the position of the state or of the community. And if the politician is in the executive, the role is really significant. And I would be happy if our new government will go back to the question of persecution for faith abroad. And I hope that it will be an important part of our foreign policy, not only on the diplomatic level, but on the practical level as well. This is something that was not present in the previous government. We are a mid-sized country, and we need to look for allies who will accept these issues, these topics, and create pressure and help. Also, as a citizen, I can do one important thing. When I'm going to the election, I can vote for those politicians who favor this topic and who don't only talk about it, but are actually ready to act. As a manager or businessman, what can I do? You can help more. if you have the possibility. And international business questions are also connected connected to the fact whether we would like to have a fair relationship in the human rights area. That's also a message that we can send. So again, that's a thing where we can do more. And what can I do as a teacher? I think teachers have a great power here. In primary schools and on higher levels, they can show the pupils or the students what happened in the past and what's still happening in Cuba, North Korea, worldwide. So they can clearly speak about this in their education, and also based on our experience as Czechoslovakia. What can I do as a doctor? We have projects such as Médecins Sans Frontières, and we can see that there are areas where there are conflicts, so they can actually help there. What can a rector of a university do? When the conflict got really serious in Iraq, universities were able to help students from the region so that they can continue their studies, for example, in our country. For example, if you have a 4-year or 5th-year student of medicine, it would be a great loss if they were not able to finish their studies. And what can I do as a student? The fact that I'm going abroad, for example, through Erasmus, even though I'm not going to a conflict area or to a country where persecution is happening, the fact that I'm abroad alone means that my life will be richer when I see a country where different religions are active. So you are actually fighting those borders or those prejudices. So this is also important to develop. What can I do as a parent? I can do a lot as a parent. You can speak to your children, explain things, explain why these things are happening, so that from the early age they can see that there are situations happening with a particular reason. This is important also with reference to the Czech and Slovak societies on social networks, so that young people don't keep silent, so that they can formulate their opinion, and the basis is in the families. And one last thing, as a person, as a human, not to be indifferent, to love thy neighbor, and use one of the opportunities that I lined out. You don't have to do much, but even if you do a little bit, it can all fit into the overall puzzle, and the world can become a better place. Thank you for your attention, and I would like to thank everyone who is helping at various levels, whether they are seen or not. And thank you very much for this marathon, ending with the fundraising concert. I'm really happy for helping to organize this event.
Tak děkujeme.
Thank you for this input. You can see that this is an event that invited Minister Kulhánek, and we also have a chairman of the opposition. So this is not something about politics, because this is about a program for all parties. So who's the last speaker? It will be Petr Jan Vinš. And to introduce him is quite complicated, because there are many positions. That's why he has also two first names. So, briefly, Petr Vinš is a theologian, a Judaist and religious scholar, and a clergyman of the Old Catholic and Anglican churches. And yesterday he was re-elected the General Secretary of the Ecumenical Council of Churches, so we congratulate you on this. He studied in Prague, Bern and Tel Aviv, and he has a long-standing interest in the Middle East, and he's also involved in helping local Christian communities in cooperation with the Order of St. Lazarus. I'm passing you the floor. Dear friends, good afternoon. Let me just have a comment on something that has been said. Yesterday we elected the new presidency of the Ecumenical Council. I was actually re-elected last year. I want to speak here not on behalf of the organizers of Red Wednesday, but on my own behalf as a person for whom these issues are highly important. Sometimes I ask myself how we in the Czech Republic, with our restricted funds and abilities, can help. I would like to thank Mr. Jurečka, who partly spoke about the same things that I have wanted to mention. It's no rocket science. The things that we can do are minor things, but they can really make a difference. Let me remind one nice text which influenced me a lot. In 1978, Václav Havel wrote one famous essay which is called The Power of the Powerless. And it says that those who seem to be powerless actually hold great power in their hands. The essay starts very wittily with a paraphrase to the Communist Manifesto. It says that there is a monster in Eastern Europe, the dissenters, the dissidents. And remember what they had to do. They were the really powerless people, but they had great power in their hands because the regime was afraid of them. The regime was afraid of the moral compass that they had inside them. They were afraid of the values that they stood for. In the freedom of religion, in the World Report, we heard that the authoritarian regimes are those who persecute the people. This is because they are afraid of the morals of the religion. And this is something that does not relate only to the regime, which these regimes usually promise a paradise on the earth, but it's actually rather a hell on the earth. Within the Ecumenical Council, I often meet one phenomenon, and I'm sure that the representatives of the political life also meet this phenomenon. That is, that by diplomatic efforts, a resolution is drafted, and immediately afterwards you are criticized because you are just giving them the words, but the people can't see any acts. So I want to tell you about specific steps that we can take, and I divided this into 4 categories. The first category is support to specific projects implemented at a specific place. You can choose Caritas, Czech Republic, or Médecins Sans Frontières, or People in Need, Red Cross, or any other organization. You should be interested in this type of projects that are already being implemented, in the support that is being provided. It can also be done by someone else than the organization that you belong to, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The second category is activism, personal activism of every one of us. We heard already that the death of one person is a tragedy, but the death of 1 million of people is just statistics. And this is something that the largest murderer of the 20th century said. We should have an interest in specific stories of people coming from the regions in which freedom of religion is violated. And we can also use the closeness, our closeness to the people who have the same belief. We have contacts to these people thanks to our organizations. And we know about their personal stories and what they have to face. What can we do? These may be people persecuted by a totalitarian regime. So we can, for example, turn to the embassies of those countries, and we may write letters to the representatives of states. When I spoke at Radio Proglas about Red Wednesday, Václav Malík was there, and he said that in the era of communists, there were letters sent defending the dissidents, and that it played a major role. It means that the persecuted people, the oppressed people who are controlled by the regime are not forgotten. And this is something that every authoritarian regime wishes, that no one is interested in what the regime actually does. And the second thing that we can do is not to give such space to the authoritarian regimes. We should really respond to specific cases, to specific stories, specific situations. The third thing that we can do is to exert civil pressure in both the positive and negative sense. It has already been said that we can choose the political representatives for whom protection of human rights is important, the political representatives who don't care about immediate political wins, but who also can run certain political risks. And we can also exert negative political pressure. We should remind our politicians when they are too indifferent or don't make any action. We heard about the report of the Aid to the Church in Need. We heard that one of the large countries in Asia is suspected for doing a genocide on one minority in that country. So let's look at our clothes. Perhaps our outfits were also produced in China. So we are tempted to also follow this trend, and we are tempted to leave the hands of these regimes free. And I think that our pressure on the political representatives of our country should be much higher. The fourth category of the things that we can do is a Christian-related category. We have to be aware that not everything can be changed in this world by ourselves, but we can also pray for the change in aspects that we can't change. And we can think of the persecuted people. This is something that we should do not only now on Red Wednesday. It should become a part of our daily life as the life of believers. Let me mention a few more things. I think that we also need to cultivate our historical memory. our country went through two major totalitarian regimes in the 20th century. And the second era, the communist regime, had a major impact on religion, which can be still felt today. We should be committed to cultivating the historical memory of that era, to cultivate the memories of all the people who, due to their faith, were impacted. And this is something that we should always remember. And the memory of these people can provide motivation to us not to allow these atrocities anymore. We should also be interested in those who live with us, the immigrants, the refugees. These are the people that come to our country to find a refuge. Quite often we hear that we should primarily help at the place of problem. Of course, we can agree with this. But on the other hand, this argument should not mean that we will use inhuman behavior and towards these people and mistreat them because they had to leave their country because of various reasons. I'm very glad that Red Wednesday gathers many people of various political affiliation, of various religious affiliation, of different beliefs. I'm convinced that the topic of religious freedom has a potential to unite us because we don't defend one category against the other one. We defend something that is fundamental for us. And when commemorating them, it should be especially efficient. So we should remind ourselves that people suffer elsewhere in the world, and we should always try to act using the specific means that I have mentioned and by any other steps. We should all do this minor step. I mentioned Havel's essay, The Power of the Powerless, and it ends by saying that a lighter future will not be something distant that we can see over there, but it may be something that already exists here, but we are unable to see it yet. So perhaps we need the right light to become enlightened, and maybe one of such lights can be the churches lit up in red. They show that we are not indifferent to the suffering of others due to their religion or belief. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dear friends, now is the time for your questions. Nina?
I wanted to ask to all of you, what do you think about the lack of leadership that we are all suffering in trying to defend religious freedom? And as Anna Zaborska mentioned, it's important to forge alliances. So I would like to propose a couple of actions related to what we all said. Alliance among the Visegrad 4 countries, together with the Baltics and certainly Croatia, both politically at the level of ambassadors to freedom of religion, parliamentary groups, and at the UN, at the International Religious Freedom and Belief Alliance, to act together. And secondly, an alliance of the bishops' conferences, and I'm talking to Father Přibyl here, because it is very important that the bishops' conferences of the same countries, Visegrad 4, Baltics, and Croatia, act together against persecution. Then all small countries can have a voice this way, and associations like Aid to the Church in Need are ready to support this kind of efforts. And also to the Bishops' Conference to have the synods of the bishops calling for a discussion on persecution in 2023. This can be one of the objectives of the Alliance of Bishops' Conferences. So I wanted to know, if you think that this is feasible or it sounds completely unrealistic.
Tak to je otázka.
Well, this is a question that can be directed to several of our panelists. I think Marian Jurečka is getting ready to answer. Thank you very much. I think that you are right. In what concerns the area where we should be looking for allies so that we can have a stronger voice, V4 and other partners. I would also think Germany would be a good partner in this question for the future. And I can promise for our future government or new government, it is something that we would like to stress in the international cooperations. I think Petr Fiala, the next prime minister, is somebody who feels these questions are very close to him because he lived through the totalitarian era, and I think he has a very good understanding of why this is important. So we have the prime minister, and I think the foreign policy will also be an important topic, and we will certainly try to promote this. Hopefully other organizations as well, like NGOs or the Bishops' Conference, this would also be very much needed. Any other questions? Olivier Poquion would like to say something. Olivier, did you want to say anything?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry there is
Ano.
But I just wanted to say that if an alliance is dedicated to get a majority, it could be wise to go not just only on the like-minded partners, but also to look outside of the usual group of partners to get some wider support. And in this region, in the Middle East, you may also find some partners interested by this topic. I let you investigate, and I would be happy to discuss the point. But focusing only on a small group of countries that will not have the majority nor at the EU nor at the UN is not very practical. And we are trying to focus on incarnation, then finding working solutions. Thank you.
Děkujeme.
Thank you. Marian Jurečka would like to respond very briefly. I think that it is very important to look for other partners who are not so traditional for this topic, and these are representatives of big transnational companies, because these companies in the commercial sector, you can see how they were able to move forward topics such as the climate change. The business is not looking only at profit, but also at ethical aspects, and I think there is still room to communicate with them about this. They could provide some instruments and push on these countries the violation of human rights and religious rights. I think these are the partners that we could also address. Mrs. Záborská. Thank you very much. Just very briefly, I think we have to create alliances wider or more narrow, but it's important that those who are part of the alliance have the same values and the same objectives. Because what happens often, and what is a problem, is that if you want to have a big alliance, then you are joining people who have different ideas on human rights, and then suddenly you are losing time by discussing the definitions of human rights, let's say. So the alliance has to be defined by a shared objective and shared values that will be used. Yes, I have to agree, because the United Nations wasn't even able to define terrorism. Petr Jan Vinš. Just very briefly, what Mr. Jurečka said about big business players. I think that you know about cases where business partners started to look at the climate change or gender representation and other topics. I don't think it is because their businesses are suddenly so enthusiastic about those questions, but because they realize that there is pressure from society that would eventually cost them money. And one of the possibilities for us is to create not only pressure on the political representation, but also on businesses, so that they take the question of the violation of religious freedom seriously. For example, not to use subcontractors coming from Uyghur slave work, for example, or work with regions where the human rights are not respected. Thank you. We have another question over there. Good evening. My name is Petr Hula. I would like to mention one thing. Mrs. Záborská inspired me to this question by speaking about silence, that we shouldn't be indifferent and get used to silence. I traveled to the Arab Peninsula for business a few months ago, and I think there is one country that is not mentioned enough in what concerns religious freedom. It is Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, when you are a businessman or a tourist, and if they find a Christian symbol or the Bible with you, you can get slashed 200 times. It's a public punishment. And if you have more than one Bible, it's spreading Christianity, and it means the capital sentence in Saudi Arabia. So, of course, it is a country that is important in terms of oil export. It is a paradox that this is a country where we speak about liberal or reformist tendencies that are supposedly represented by Mohammed bin Salman bin Abdulaziz, the crown prince that was involved in the murder of a Khartoumi journalist at the embassy in Turkey. When we saw some Turkish evidence about this, and there were some international negotiations about this, even the Trump administration, but the Saudi royal family said, well, it's none of your business. You shouldn't be looking at what is going on in our country. It is a huge family, and they consider the country to be their own property, including the inhabitants of the country. So there was some pressure on bin Salman and Saudi Arabia as a country by Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Donald Trump, and he's a Jew. So that's quite a paradox. And so when I went to Saudi Arabia, it made me think quite a lot. So we have to look at the political the political aspects as well, and the human rights, how they are violated there. And if you denounce Islam, again you are facing capital punishment. What can we do? Well, I don't think that we can do much in this specific situation. Thank you. Of course, there are various freedoms, and freedom of religion is one of them. Is it as important as we are saying here? And I'm not sure whom I should ask, but you are free to respond. Lukáš Cyrilo didn't have the opportunity to speak. I'm a member of the OSCE and for the 6th year, and in the EU I think that there is a confusion in terminology. Something that used to be clear isn't so anymore. We had a discussion about the Declaration on Family, and I was listening to the contributions of my colleagues for 2.5 hours, and then I asked them, what is family according to them? And there was no agreement on that. And then we are speaking about freedom of religion. If I ask, what is it? And suddenly you find out it's actually religious indifference. And we could continue like this. So the question is whether Christian countries should be the carriers of certain values. So I think that we have to make sure we know what these values are, and that's the role of all of us. If we are too tolerant and too politically correct, some opinions that are very sophisticated and refined and bringing into our system something that is foreign, that we cannot relate to and identify with. So I think we will be losing the basic Christian values that the world was built on. If you look at the map of the world and the advanced countries, I think that they are identical. So the approach to freedom, to climate, and so on, these are basically Christian values. Who came up with slavery and what slavery means? Christianity. So we have to ask the question whether in our positions, Christian professional, whether we are going to say that we think that the value is different than someone is saying. I think that Christianity should be present in all our activities, and we may have resigned on that and acting as if it was not important. Ideology should replace the void that we can see today.
Mrs. Záborská would like to comment on this. Just one comment to Saudi Arabia. You told us about the violations of human rights in the name of business. And several years ago, all European media said that the situation in Saudi Arabia gets improved because women can already drive a car. So we are sacrificing the human rights just to do business with them. Marian Jurečka, Pope Francis and his foreign diplomacy also shows us how we should proceed, how the interreligious dialogue should be done. I must say, if someone tells me in 2017 then that the Pope will come to Iraq, I would never believe this. This is something that actually disappeared due to the COVID pandemic, but this is one of the major news of this year. And do the representatives of our churches travel to these affected areas? I'm glad that Mr. Graubner went with us and that Cardinal Volk also went to Iraq. But this should happen more regularly, and we should also visit these areas more frequently. And the freedom of religion is one of the priorities that we should defend. Even if we are to develop our business relations, we have to emphasize this. It will not change overnight. I'm sure that Western countries, when they were looking at the Iron Curtain, they surely had similar discussions. They were discussing how fast you can help these countries. So we should be patient and we should not be indifferent. Okay? You can ask a question now. Vivian Curiková. I'll be very brief. I would be glad if the participants could be aware that not only the common values, but also cultural, anthropological tolerance should be respected. I have been involved in many negotiations. And values can divide people. That's just my comment to what we have heard. Okay, thank you. That's a challenge for us. Other questions? Just one question, please, or will there be more questions? I think this will be probably the last question. I will have a question to Mosul. How do you cooperate currently in Iraq? How are you accepted by the Muslims? And where can you see the benefit of the visit of Pope Francis? This is a question to Father Olivier.
We are collaborating on a daily basis. It means that the driver of the car is a Muslim, the doorkeeper is a Christian, the lady taking care of the tea is a Christian, and the gardener is a Muslim. We are really in the same boat. So last week we faced a break into the internet, and that was a common concern for all of us. So we were all complaining together. So complaining together, facing difficulties together. You may have seen when I was speaking that there was a power shortage. Facing that is helping us to go together. When Pope Francis came, he came in pilgrimage. As some speakers said, it is very important to meet with the people, and this is what we are doing. As he said, we've got a common origin and we've got a shared responsibility. So day after day, we are working, trying to hire Muslims and Christians and Yazidi all together. Because it is not because of values that they are joining, or because they are tolerant. Some are not, but because they see the interest for their children, they see the interest for their family, they see interest for their country. We are trying to rebuild human fraternity. So day after day, step by step, when we are demanding, it's benefiting the neighbors. When some workers are on site, they are buying some coffee, etc. And this is feeding the local economy through employment, through bringing back the electricity with the Pope visit, for example, and then with the President Macron visit. That was a great benefit for all the neighborhood, Christians and Muslims all together. What I see is that today in Mosul, where 99% of the population is Sunni Muslim and Arabic, the Kurdish didn't come back. The Yazidi didn't come back. And most of the Christians didn't come back. But now the Muslims are asking us to come back. I met some youth the other day. They were getting out of school and they said, we want our Christians to come back. And an old lady was telling me, I want the bells of my church to come back. She was Muslim. But she wants the Christians to play their role. It's not about coming back as it was before, and demography is not going in this direction. People who are abroad will probably not come back, but we've got many babies. This year there was 500 marriages in Caracas, and we are expecting a new generation, and this new generation to take the lead and to contribute to build something new with the people who are on site. It's like in diplomacy. We've got to talk to one another, and not only to our friends, but to go and to meet with the people in order to convince, to share opinions, and to try to build together this human fraternity.
Tak děkujeme.
Thank you. And the very last question or comment, Hayato Okamura. So, and there is another question. Okay, so we will have two more questions. Hayato Josef Okamura. I have just come from the establishing meeting of the new Chamber of the Deputies, and at the end of the meeting I had the opportunity to say to the rest of the MPs about Red Wednesday. We reminded ourselves that apart from our responsibility for men and women in our constituencies, in our country, as the members of the parliament, we are responsible for people anywhere in this world. We are living in a democracy, in a free world, and we all have responsibility for people who are persecuted and oppressed due to any religion or belief. I would also like to say that I'm partly Czech, partly Japanese, and some predecessors were Shintoists. I also have some roots in Moravia. My wife also is from Russia and Ukraine. We use various languages in our family. We lived in various countries. And I think it's my mission, therefore, to initiate dialogue between various people. And my parents had to be engaged in a dialogue of cultures. It was not easy, but I must say that I'm glad that they remained loyal to one another until the very end, and that they have educated us in this way. So I would like to thank a lot for this initiative of Red Wednesday, and I promise that in the Chamber of the Deputies, we will try to work in the sense of dialogue and support to people that are persecuted for faith in various parts of our world. Okay, thank you. And Mr. Ambassador, please a short comment.
In Prague. First of all, I would like to thank Chairman Svoboda for organizing this conference. It was excellent, really. It was very good to hear what is done by Czechia and by Slovakia in this field practically, and I think that what we are doing is very similar in Hungary. Besides the different NGOs, there is a governmental program called Hungary Helps, and simply encouraging to see how we are on the same line when we are speaking about how to help in practice, besides, of course, the political activities which is needed to help these practical activities. So thank you very much again.
Tak my děkujeme.
Thank you, köszönöm szépen. And now the final word of Mr. Svoboda. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to conclude this conference. I'm especially glad that this conference met its purpose. While in previous years we were informed about various stories and aspects relating to persecution for faith, we met direct or indirect witnesses of various forms of persecution. But this year, we wanted to look at how we can practically help. And I think that especially after the second panel of our conference, we can hardly say that this is none of our business, that there is no way how we could participate in our support to people persecuted for faith. After the first panel, and especially after seeing the statistics provided every year by Marcella Schemanski from Aid to the Church in Need, we will usually have a headache, depression, and want to have a glass of a spirit. But the second panel, I think, opened the door to various forms of aid. It showed us the light at the end of the tunnel, although the tunnel is very long. I can also feel that we have opened questions that will need to be rediscussed again. For example, the idea or the issue of involvement of transnational companies to fight persecution for faith. I think this is a great challenge. And for the next conference, we will probably look for some representatives of this supranational business. We want to know about their attitude towards the matter. So this might be motivation for you to participate in the conference next year, if this is possible. And I would also like to thank you, all of those who participated and had the courage to participate in person. When the COVID pandemic culminates, even the presence at a conference may seem as a problem to many people. All the more, I would like to thank the panelists who came from Prague or from other places, or who joined us online and provided their experience and their findings. This helped a lot the success of our conference. And let me also thank our moderators, Monika Klementová and Daniel Raus. You have done a perfect job during this afternoon. I think that we should applaud to them. Pavel, that has been extremely nice. Thank you very much. After this conference, there will be a joint prayer, and we will pray for the things that have been mentioned here. And we will also walk through the old town. We will see the buildings lit up in red. And together with TV Noah, we will participate in the fundraising concert that will support a specific project implemented in Mosul. That's the project that has been presented by Father Olivier Poquion, whom I'm sending my greetings again. We came to know Mr. Poquion because he was in a role of chaplain in the European Parliament. Once again, I would like to thank all of you for participating, and I've forgotten to thank our great interpreters for their job. Thanks a lot and have a nice evening.